For March 30th, 2017. I thank all of you for being here. We have waited at length with much anticipation for the report backs from the various entities of the city that were directed to evaluate a series of proposals and initiatives. And so we will take those back. We are going to have public comment as we deal with each item so that the public comment can be relevant and substantive and have the advantage of being informed by where the various entities have concluded. And then they can use that as a basis for their public comment so that it's a public comment that is relevant and organic to the conversation. I want to thank everybody for being here. Obviously, these are the most extraordinary times that we have lived in, perhaps the most extraordinary times of our country. Seldom have we seen a presidency and an administration in Washington more encumbered with threats of investigations around corruption and illegal activity. Seldom have we seen an administration that has taken an assault on large segments of the American society, be they immigrant or be they of various religious backgrounds or of their sexual orientation, of their disabilities. Seldom have we ever seen any administration be so hostile to these important segments of our community. We in Los Angeles do not find that acceptable nor tolerable, and that is the purpose of this committee. It is an ad hoc committee today, but it is a committee that is in flux, that is evolving, and that will continue to move forward as the challenges confront us. As local leaders, we are well aware of the risks the Trump administration has posed on us. I will say to you that in my district, we had a father taken away from his children as he took them off to school. We do not want to live in a city. We do not want to live in a city where that takes place. I don't want to live in a country where that takes place. So we are anxious to be here. I will assure you that the city staff has been working relentlessly on their report backs. They are here today, as they were instructed last time, and we will continue to move on those agenda items and policy matters with ample time for well-deserved comment from the public. I want to thank my committee members for participating and joining me this afternoon. They have very full schedules, and so we will try to move this agenda forward promptly. And I thank them for being here. Colleagues, can we hear from you? Mr. Wizad, before you have to leave. Mr. Wizad passes. Ms. Martinez? No comment. Mr. Ru, the one immigrant of this, oh, not the one immigrant from Asia. Mr. Ru? No comment? Mr. Curran, the tallest Mexican I know. Okay. Fine. Then let's move forward.
Right here, sir.
Yes, sir.
Item number 1, the Chief Legislative Analyst to report relative to how a sanctuary city is defined and how it applies to the city of Los Angeles. This item is pursuant to council action of January 20, 2017, directing the CLA to report relative to this matter. And sir, do you want to hear item 2 as well at this time?
Yes, they're common themed.
Item number 2, a CLA to report pursuant to Resolution Krikorian Cedillo relative to opposing H.R. 83, the Mobilizing Against Sanctuary Cities Act, which would prohibit any state or local government in violation of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996 from receiving federal funds. This matter was waived by Rules Committee. We have Felipe Chavez from the CLA's office to present.
Good afternoon. I'm Felipe Chavez with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. Before you today is a motion.
And at some point, I don't know if do we have a rep from the mayor's office here? Nope. Are you prepared to speak on Special Order 20? No? Okay. At some point, then maybe you might let the office know it might be appropriate for someone from your office to come and speak as it relates to this. on last week's Executive Director 20. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, before you today is a motion, Cedillo, Weezer, Wesson, Harris, Dawson, O'Farrell, Price, Rue, which asked city staff to report back on several items related to immigrant affairs. This report today only focuses on the issue of sanctuary cities. In today's presentation, I will address the term sanctuary cities and how the term applies to the city. I will address state and federal laws related to immigration enforcement. I will talk about the Secure Communities Program and how that relates to immigration or ICE detainers. I will also address new legislation that has been introduced or executive actions related to the subject. And also, I will mention some of LAPD practices with respect to immigration enforcement. The initial question, or the main question that was asked, was what is the definition of sanctuary cities? What we found was that there is no legal definition of the term. The term, which is used interchangeably with the term sanctuary jurisdictions, is closely associated or mostly associated with how local law enforcement agencies cooperate with federal immigration authorities, or also how some local law enforcement agencies or cities decide to restrict or limit local resources for the enforcement of federal immigration law. There are some localities, some jurisdictions that have self-declared themselves as a sanctuary city. But when you look closely at their policies are not different from other jurisdictions that do not declare themselves sanctuary cities. So that was one of the findings that we have, that it really doesn't matter whether you use the word sanctuary. It is the policies that you have in place that some view as sanctuary. For example, the San Francisco ordinance does not mention the word sanctuary, but it's been viewed as San Francisco has been viewed as a sanctuary city. Their law, which was adopted back in the 80s, basically also states that local resources would not be expended on the enforcement of federal immigration law. And there have been some documents, some studies by the Department of Justice that have indicated that they have reviewed such ordinances, but even though they're not in agreement with them, they didn't find any violation of federal law. Other jurisdictions may be viewed based on the fact that they do not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. They may be viewed as sanctuary cities. For example, the Center for Immigration Studies, they compiled a list of those cities that either do not respond to immigration detainers or do not engage in 287G agreements with ICE or DHS. So by their definition, those localities would be deemed as sanctuary cities. There are a few laws that have been mentioned recently that have to do with how local law enforcement agencies would play a role in the cooperation with DHS on federal immigration law. Title 8, Section 1373 allows for the exchange of information related to immigration status between DHS and local law enforcement agencies. The law prohibits the enactment of local laws or policies that prohibit the exchange of such information. But this law also does not require local law enforcement agencies to exchange that information. A different law, Title 8, Section 1357G, which is also known as a 287G agreement, allows local law enforcement agencies to enter into agreements with DHS or ICE to basically deputize local law police officers to assume the role of federal immigration officers. To my knowledge, there are currently 37 law enforcement agencies in 16 states that have 287G agreements. LAPD does not have a 287G agreement, and recently the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors terminated their 287G agreement. There's another program. There's a program that's called the Secure Communities Program. Through this program, basically, local law enforcement agencies are required to enter biometrics or fingerprints of every person that is arrested into a database. This database is forwarded to the FBI, and the FBI then forwards information to ICE or DHS. If DHS has a match and there's a person of interest, then DHS issues a detainer or an immigration detainer for the person they're looking for, and they notify the local law enforcement agency of that. Then it is up to the local law enforcement agency to either comply or not comply. My understanding is that complying with these detainers is voluntary. It is not mandatory. Many police agencies do not comply unless the detainer is accompanied with a judicial warrant. In California, local law enforcement agencies are further restricted. There are laws such as the Trust Act, which provides that law enforcement agencies in California that wish to comply with immigration detainers may only do so if the individual has been convicted of certain violent crimes or felonies. There's another law that is called the Truth Act, and this basically provides that when ICE requests to interview a detainee, the law enforcement agency must notify the individual that ICE is looking for them, and also advise them that they may decline the interview if they wish to do so. New legislation or executive action that's been introduced is an executive order issued by President Trump related to sanctuary cities. And both the executive order and federal bill H.R. 83 both basically indicate that jurisdictions that do not comply with 1373, or I believe any other laws that prohibit the enforcement of federal immigration law, would be denied, would not be, the federal government would withhold federal funds from such jurisdictions. It is my understanding that, there have been that the executive order has been challenged. The County of Santa Clara and the City and County of San Francisco have challenged the executive order based on the fact that it violates the Constitution. There's another bill, SB 54, that, there's another analyst who will be discussing that later today, but basically also would restrict how local law enforcement agencies in California would cooperate with federal immigration authorities. And lastly, with respect to LAPD practices relative to immigration enforcement, LAPD has provided that as a matter of practice, they do not comply with any immigration detainers unless such detainers are accompanied by a judicial warrant. LAPD does not have a 287G contract with ICE. And additionally, as part of their manual, there are two provisions that stood out to me that indicate that officers should not initiate police action with the objective of discovering the alien status of a person. And the second one is undocumented status in itself is not a matter for police action. In addition to that, department representatives have indicated that they're in the process of removing section 675.35 related to the holding of individuals from the manual, and as much as it is no longer a practice of the department. The LAPD also participates in joint task forces, some of which ICE or DHS may also participate, but every officer is required to acknowledge in writing that officers shall not initiate police action with the objective of discovering the alien status of a person. Our office has two recommendations, and these recommendations are that the council instruct the LAPD with the assistance of the city attorney to review the LEPD manual to ensure all sections are consistent with current practices, and to instruct the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst, with the assistance of the Police Department and City Attorney, to continue to monitor federal and state legislation and administrative action that may impact the city's practices relative to immigration.
Mr. Rizak?
Thank you. With respect to secure communities, does the county still use secure communities in their practices? I know there was some issue about 2 years ago whether they would continue with it or not.
To my knowledge, they are required to submit the information of every person who was arrested.
Yeah.
So that is part of secure communities. But what also happened 2 years ago is the fact that they terminated the 287 contract, which removed ICE agents from the jails.
So they removed them from the jails?
That is my understanding.
Okay, so they've been removed. Okay, good. I thought they were continuing with that practice. Okay. And so with respect to the executive orders, and they say any sanctuary city, and given that, as you mentioned, there really has no real definition, but the practices of the city will appear to fall within that definition. So without us having any legal remedy at this time, whether it's constitutional or not, do you think that executive order would apply to us? It's hard to say, right?
It is hard to say. But, one of the sections that is mentioned in both the executive order and HR 83 is section 1373. And it cites this section as if local jurisdictions violate that provision, they would be subject to not receiving federal funds. However, that provision, the California Attorney General and various courts have said that is a voluntary provision, and it does not require that information gets exchanged. Some jurisdictions do, and in some cases, local law enforcement agencies may find it necessary to inform DHS or ICE when they come in contact with somebody who has been already convicted of a serious crime, has been deported, and they're back in the country.
And so any of the legal court proceedings, would that affect the application of that executive order to us, or should we be working with our city attorney to direct any legal action against the executive order?
I think both.
Both? Okay. And is someone here from the city attorney's office? So as of today, we have no direction to our city attorney to challenge the constitutionality of these executive orders, although it will affect us here should it be attempted to be enforced, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
Yeah, so I think it'll behoove us, should we want to not lose federal funds, because I think under the definition of what the loosely defined sanctuary city, we are in practice a sanctuary city. It would behoove us that not to put our federal funding in danger, that we prepare a legal response to the executive order. Should all the other challenges that are occurring throughout the country, none of those court proceedings will have the jurisdiction over the city of Los Angeles. I think up to this point we've been left out of them. So that's something we should consider, Chair, as we move forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask, does the mayor or its Office of Immigrant Affairs have someone here? Please join us.
Do we know why the city attorney's office is in here? Were you invited?
You want to give us your comments on these two orders and how they relate to the executive directive that took place, I think it was last week?
Sure. So thank you all. Good afternoon. My name is Anuj Gupta. I'm the General Counsel of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And just to sort of give a quick summary with regards to Executive Directive 20 that the Mayor signed last week, obviously it as we all do, we sort of recognize the extraordinary sort of climate of fear and anxiety that currently exists as a result of the new administration's approach to immigration enforcement. And I think we have observed it in concrete ways at the Lincoln Heights Youth Complex, for example, where the mayor signed the executive directive. Enrollment for students in the youth arts program there had declined by about 35% year over year in a heavily immigrant community. Largely, and the Arts Center director reported having spoken to many parents who were quite clear about the reasons for not wanting to send their kids out of the home for arts programs. Similarly, we learned at the event from Chief Beck, while of course we can say that correlation doesn't necessarily indicate causation, he did indicate that LAPD statistics had reflected a marked decrease in reporting among Hispanic and Latino communities in Los Angeles for domestic violence and sexual abuse crimes since the date of the election. And so again, the idea behind this executive order was to document and collect and reaffirm all of the existing city policies, law enforcement, and as well as with respect to city facilities and programs, to really reassure our immigrant residents that the entire city stands united to provide as much as possible a protecting and welcoming environment for all of our residents, and ensure that city residents feel confident availing themselves of our programs, of our resources, of our facilities, from our parks to our libraries to our senior centers. So just to sort of briefly summarize, the executive directive that the mayor signed reaffirms all of the existing LAPD policies, which were just referenced by my colleague, with respect to immigration enforcement, from the policy embodied in Special Order 40 at the LAPD to the non-participation in the 287G program, where local law enforcement agents are effectively deputized as federal immigration enforcement officials. And the directive expanded those same policies to the airport police, the port police, as well as the fire department, so that all of our residents can take confidence that all public safety agencies in the city are kind of united in this principle of not engaging in immigration enforcement, not conditioning their protective services based on immigration status. And then further, in the executive directive, the mayor assured that residents that all city services, programs, facilities will be available to all residents regardless of citizenship or immigration status, that no programs or facilities will ask for citizenship or status unless required by law, and that all city facilities and departments are directed to provide a safe and welcoming environment for all of our residents. Finally, just in terms of resources, the mayor did, and our office did release this community resource guide for immigrant Angelenos. We have, I think, made copies available to all of your offices, but we'd be happy to provide additional. And this will be made available to residents at all city facilities and departments, and as well as it's already on our website in English and Spanish. We're working on additional translations, but it provides a comprehensive sort of know your rights and resource guide, as well as contacts for dozens of community groups and resources for immigrant Angelenos in this sort of new climate. So I'm happy to answer any further questions that you all have.
Well, I was hoping the city attorney was here, but
We have someone.
Oh, we do have. I thought
No,
we
do have
asked him
someone.
earlier, and I didn't think anyone was here. But I have a couple of questions. Are you done, Mr. Minor?
Yes, you are.
So, getting back to the sanctuary city status, how does the federal government monitor cities that have declared themselves sanctuary cities? Do we know how they're being monitored? For example, San Francisco, and I believe it's Seattle. Do we know how they're being monitored?
Well, one way that they don't have they have a list of cities and counties that participate in the 287G agreement. So by that definition, they wouldn't consider those cities sanctuary. But my understanding is that the Center for Immigration Studies compiled a list of localities that do not comply with immigration detainers, do not engage in 287G agreements, and those two primarily, and they submitted this list to the federal government. The federal government then also did an investigation to determine whether these cities, or they took a sample to determine whether those cities had been in violation, and no violation was found.
And no violation was found?
Correct.
So nothing's being done to the cities in terms of sanctions or anything of that type of what it was being, the threats are being made by the federal government. These cities have not come under that kind of...
Correct.
They're being intimidated, but nothing's really being done to them.
Correct. In fact, even San Francisco, which is one of the cities that has the most progressive policies or ordinances that is viewed as a sanctuary policy, the Office of the Inspector General conducted a study, and then they found that while their policy is progressive, it still does not violate any federal laws.
So, Mr. Chair, I think we've been discussing this issue for quite some time now. What are we doing in terms of a city and directing the city attorney's office to perhaps come up with language or protections that would protect us from these types of threats from the federal government? Is that something that we can do in this committee? To direct the city attorney's office to begin to look at measures to protect us from any threats. I call it bullying, quite honestly, to try to intimidate cities like Los Angeles from moving in this direction. So what are we doing to protect ourselves and be able to fight back some of these threats?
One thing that the city that we did to the city attorney's office was the city attorney did join an amicus brief that was filed by a group of cities across the country in the Santa Clara and San Francisco actions. These are the actions challenging the sanctuary city executive order.
We just joined it, but we weren't leading the effort.
We joined the amicus brief, correct?
And that's all we've done.
That's all of the legal action that we've taken, yes.
I really feel strongly about, instead of being on the defensive, coming out and figuring out what we can do as a city to protect ourselves from these type of threats, because I don't think it's going to stop, and it's just prolonging us from making a decision whether we should move in this direction or not.
Mr. Price.
Thank you for the report. Question, you mentioned it's clear that the city has not taken any formal steps. Hasn't the state, though, joined some actions, and what's the impact of the state's response to this as vis-a-vis our city or cities in California?
I believe that the actions that the state joined were on the executive order regarding the foreign entry executive order. I don't believe that they've joined or filed any amicus briefs in the sanctuary city action.
Well, I certainly agree with the councilwoman that we need to be on the aggressive, more the aggressive side, proactive side, as opposed to just playing defense. I think we need to state our position and get out there with it. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank CAO and the CLA for the report. And I'm in agreement with Councilmember Huizar as well as Councilwoman Martinez and everyone else on this committee. I want us to be proactive, and I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but I want us to be proactive and prepare. And I think Councilmember Huizar stated it best to ask our city attorney to prepare, because and I know it's also kind of unfair to the city attorney because the president is doing all these executive orders, kind of bullying us and kind of threatening us of what they're going to do, but they haven't really done it yet. So it's like, but I feel we have to prepare for what they're potentially going to do, because all the court cases have shown that these sanctuary cities, including San Francisco, they're doing everything within the law. So it's not like they're violating anything for the federal government to come after us or pull funding. So when they do, we have to be prepared, and that's when we hit back. So I think we have to do some sort of preparation, proactive preparation, and ask our city attorney to work on that. And I think this really reinforces, and I know, Mr. Chair, you came up with a great idea of having an immigrant advocate for a legal advisor for our own committee. And I know we're working on that feverishly, but I think this shows, issues like this show that we need some sort of immigrant advocate in this committee as well as the city to work in conjunction with the mayor's office. So, I mean, I look towards the chair or Councilman Huizar to do some sort of motion, which I'll definitely second, but also the CAO CLA's recommendation. I'd just like to add for recommendation number 1, I think both the mayor and the city council were completely on the same page. So just to reaffirm that, just add in that that we incorporate the recent mayor's executive order 20 to ensure all sections are consistent with current policies. So it's again reaffirming, but I just wanted to reassure that the city council is completely behind the mayor on this executive order.
Mr. Chair, I am prepared to make a recommendation. Like I stated earlier, I think we're on the defensive so much of the time, and we're not necessarily we haven't made a decision whether we're going to move in this direction or not. I'm very clear about where I stand on this issue. I'm prepared to move forward, but I also need the city attorney's office to be able to fight back against some of these tactics from the federal government, the threats and the bullying that continues to go on every single day. I'm ready to recommend that we get a report back from the city attorney's office about how you're going to protect our cities and our interests in case the federal government comes after us.
Okay, let me, before we move to that, let me call up Arif Ali Khan from the LAPD, who deals with these constitutional matters. Let me note that I think, with all due respect, that the resolution, that the Krikorian-Cedillo resolution relative to opposing 83, HR 83, was offered with that in mind. I think that was our intent, that we offered up our resolution to oppose HR 83 with that in mind, that we take an affirmative action to represent and defend the city. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm Arif Ali Khan. I'm the Director of Constitutional Policing and Policy for the LAPD. I just wanted to mention, I think the council member is asking an important question about what we can do affirmatively in light of the current efforts in Washington, et cetera, especially with respect to sanctuary cities. The approach Chief Beck and the LAPD has been taking is that the more we inform the public about the fact that what LAPD has done since 1979 with Special Order 40 is lawful, is in compliance with federal law, is consistent with principles of public safety and ensuring the safety and security of residents and visitors to the city of Los Angeles, that is the most important way for us to move forward on this. The administration will make whatever determinations it wants about reinterpreting 1373 with respect to grants. The LAPD has been in compliance with 1373 for many years, and as well as everything from whether we recognize detainers on which there isn't a lawful constitutional basis. We are consistent with federal, state, and local law. And so our effort to that end has been to try to inform people, inform the discussion, as Chief Beck is doing right now in Washington, D.C., that although there may be a political label of being a sanctuary city, the key fact is we're ensuring public safety and complying with the law.
Two questions. One, talk to us about the constitutional cases, particularly the case with, I think it's Texas against the Obama administration, where Justice Roberts opined on the inability the administration to essentially, quote, put a gun to the head of states for not complying with their policies?
Well, there are a series of cases that I think will come into play if the city were involved with litigation regarding these issues. I think I'd have to defer to the city attorney's office on how much we'd want to talk about that strategy, but certainly other jurisdictions have been using cases in which you cannot force the city to engage in a program or not engage to a program, especially if it's unrelated to that funding source. But regardless of that, I do believe, and I think the CLA sets forth, if you just look at what it is that the LAPD does and doesn't do, that there is no violation, willful or otherwise, with federal law. And the fact that there is no legal definition of sanctuary jurisdiction makes it difficult for all of us because it's a moving definition. But, you know, as the chief has said, since the election, the LAPD is not changing any way it does business. That has been an effective way of ensuring that we're keeping the community safe through our partnerships with all communities, regardless of immigration status.
City Attorney, you want to comment?
No, the only thing that I would have to add to that is that the office would be happy to report to you on the specifics of those cases, and we would suggest perhaps doing that in a closed session.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yes, because I think what we have before us today is opposition to a bill, and not so much a request from our city attorney to be proactive and litigate not only litigate the executive order by the president, which whether or not does this, I joined an amicus brief up in San Francisco, the court, what court was that? Santa Clara. So that, I don't know if it covers Los Angeles. Even if it does it cover Los Angeles?
The purpose of the amicus brief and having all the cities joined was to support the notion for a nationwide order.
Well, maybe the better direction we could give is to at least have a fuller report from the city attorney on what is the legal strategy to fight because there may be a larger legal strategy that the council still is not aware of, and if that's the case, we want to at least give once the legal strategy is presented, if we want it to be more aggressive, we could come up with some direction to the city attorney to be more aggressive, more so than just an amicus brief and a direct filing of something. Because even if the intimidation is there and the action is not there, I think this president needs to know that cities like Los Angeles will stand firm and aggressive and bite back just as much as he's been biting. And I think that's the aggressivity we want to see here from Los Angeles. So I think that's the kind of the tenor of what I was hearing from this committee.
I agree.
Yeah, understood. Can we get public comment now?
Councilman, could I just make...
Direction? I just want to make sure everyone's clear.
I think we'll come back and be clear on that.
And what's the timeline?
Can we get at the next?
Are you ready to report within the next
I would have
several weeks, or what does it look like? Because I think we're prolonging this unnecessarily, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of thought and analysis done, so probably in the next several weeks would be okay.
2 weeks.
So we're prepared to meet in 2 weeks with a full report, ready to move forward.
That should work,
Right?
yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I have one more question? Oh, I'm sorry. On this, I have one question of the mayor's office. Okay.
And also, report back in 2 weeks, but these days, things are changing so fast, it's like by the hour. Maybe the city attorney could be in close contact with at least our chair to, that if we need to move up the timetable, move it up, or if you need a little bit more time for whatever reason.
We can do it next week. I'm happy to work with the city attorney's office. We can do that next week. If you guys are prepared to come back next week and meet, I'm happy to meet.
Yeah.
We should move forward with all due haste on the questions of the advocate and a program to move forward for the committee. So I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Councilmember, I just want to make one comment before voting on at the point you vote on the recommendations from the CLA to clarify about the manual provision that needs to be changed. I just want to make clear to everybody who may be listening that the manual does not reflect the current practice of the department and the way detainers are handled.
Right.
There are other documents that supersede what's in the manual, directions from the chief of police. So we're just in the process of synchronizing all those documents.
Right. No, I think everybody wants the language of the manual to reflect the current practices, and that it should be made contemporary and reflective of today, and not have archaic language, let's say, from the late 70s.
Chair, can I ask a question on the mayor's office?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the mayor's directive was, amongst other things, that any program from the city, we will not ask for a person's immigrant status unless required by law, right? Now, I would like to see if we can come back with the city attorney's office and their legal strategy to see if we could challenge that unless required by law. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, the federal government's always going to require us in this atmosphere to check for a person's immigrant status. We just have executive orders right now on these bills, but you're going to see in the future, any type of funding we get, they're going to ask us to do that, or we can't get that money. So we have to challenge that unless required by law that the federal government is asking us to do up front now, so that we don't have to abide by that. We're going to do we're going to not ask anybody's immigration status, irrespective of the federal government telling us to do it or not. And so we have to see what can we do to challenge that language when a program comes from the federal government, that unless, we can't be having that language here unless required by federal law. That's the whole point of this. We don't want to follow those requirements by the federal government.
Certainly appreciate that concern, Councilmember, and I think we did work with the city attorney in sort of crafting the language. I think that was intended to refer to existing programs, for example, public housing programs that by statute are conditioned on residency status or citizenship status depending on the specific program. So it was to not sort of jeopardize our compliance with, for example, public housing legal requirements.
And so my question is, how can the city attorney come up with some analysis for us to legally challenge those requirements for existing programs and future programs?
We'd be happy to work with the city attorney.
We would be happy to work on that.
Understood. Okay, we ready for public comment? Victor Nato, UCLA Labor Center, Emmett Rivers, Esperanza Community Housing, and Brett Shears, Vote Allies, David Aboud, and Delon.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Victor Nato with the UCLA Labor Center. I want to go back to 1999 for a second. Just hang in there with me. Why? I was part of the special order task force that looked into the Rampart scandal back then. And we came up with a series of recommendations because there were so many violations of Special Order 40 that were taking place at the Rampart station. And we thought in 1999, 20 years, we need to take a good look at Special Order 40. We're almost 20 years later, so we're going on to 40 years. And I think that the task force came out with a series of recommendations in 2000. From my understanding, they have yet to be implemented within the LAPD. And I think we all got to work together to move forward and look at Special Order 40. It's outdated, how we can supplement it with some new policies, but really make it, bring us to the level where Special Order 40, that kind of policy is realistic for today's issues that we're facing with law enforcement and ICE. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Hi, my name is David Aboud. I'm with the National Day Labor Organizing Network. Thank you all so much for having us here. I want to just kind of reiterate a little bit about how high the stakes are right now for our community, how people are continuously being picked up and deported, specifically as a result of policies that have not been updated and of other policies that the city of LA has not taken to actually become a sanctuary city. So a few of those are we really need you to advance the executive directive that was made by the mayor, ED 20, and that needs to be made into a ordinance and endorsed by the City Council. We need to ensure that the LAPD does not engage in any way in federal immigration enforcement. That includes sharing information. It includes updating Special Order 40. And finally, that the LA Justice Fund, that you all need to take ownership over the LA Justice Fund, and that has to be something that the City Council is taking on as their own initiative as well, and not just the mayor's. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brett Shears. I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization per se, but I appreciate a lot of the urgency that I've been hearing from the council members, and I just want to reiterate what David was just saying, that you all need to take ownership. The stakes have clearly been raised with the mayor's executive directive and all the activities that are happening right now. The sense of urgency is high, so keep that, run with that. I do want to say something about the LA Justice Fund. I've been volunteering at Hobo Industries for almost a year now, and I'm very proud of the work I've been doing there, and a lot of the people I've been meeting are very worried about potential carve-outs in the LA Justice Fund. You would leave behind a lot of good people who have shown redemption at a level that really you can't see anywhere else at a place like Homeboy Industries. And I want you to know that there are many more people capable of that. And when you're constructing that, when you're thinking about the criteria, think about those people, think about some of the people who really are the most vulnerable. Use that language that's in the CAO and make it as inclusive as possible. I want to see it a good, strong LA Justice Fund for every Angelino. Thank you.
Yes, I had Emmett Rivers, Esperanza Community Housing. Nope. Edna Monroy, California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance. Angela Mcmillan, Marco Flores.
Hi everyone, I'm Edna Monroy with California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance and also ISAT of LA. I'm also undocumented and I'm very concerned that this is the second meeting that this committee has since Trump has been elected. And the fact that these meetings are not accessible to our community, especially to my parents, my uncle, that is priority for deportation, and many other community members. I'm here to urge you to really take a step back and look at the type of sanctuary that you want to create. How can we have a sanctuary when we have ICE in our streets, when we have ICE in the jails, both city and county jails, and when we have community members being transferred over and deported? We absolutely cannot have a sanctuary city when we have zero police accountability and shootings, right, and deaths of Black community members. And I'm also urging you to really take a consideration at being pushing for an inclusive LA Justice Fund for everyone, not just for certain people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Angela Mcmillan. I represent California for Progress. I'm also for the city of Downey, where I reside. I'm speaking today on behalf of all the children in Downey who could not be here today, but they asked me to come. I know that after I had been speaking with a lot of the children there in Downey, that obviously their fears are that they will go to school exactly as the children did on TV. You know, they went to school and their parents were deported. They look up to the young lady that was on TV yesterday speaking in regards to how she won the marathon in regards to her father, who was also deported, and that she one day will go to college and become an immigrant attorney. I ask that you think about the children, think about the people that they're leaving behind. I understand about all the deportations and everything, but we also need to remember the children that come, the next generation as well. Thank you.
Marco Flores. Megan Ortiz, Walter Nichols, Scott Doyle, Nina Torres.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for convening this committee. Again, my name is Megan Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of UDEPSCA. We operate 4 of the 7 city-funded day labor centers in Los Angeles. Over 1,000 day laborers and domestic workers that we work with annually have told us what sanctuary looks like for them. One of the things that sanctuary looks like for them is ensuring that Los Angeles, that has already been at the forefront, especially with funding day labor centers, continues to do so, and not just at existing levels, but also going beyond those levels, given the fact that ever since the election has happened, the actual use of these centers has been way more than just job sites. They have been a way for workers, their family members, to access legal services, legal advice, and to learn about what their rights are in the face of the current administration. They also know that sanctuary means disconnecting the police services with immigration so that they don't have to be fearful when they look for work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Walter Nichols. I'm a member of Indivisible Highland Park, and I'm coming here out of surprise. I'm surprised that this is only the second time that the ad hoc committee has met since the election of Donald Trump, which was in November. So now we're many months along, and it doesn't necessarily seem like there's been much progress by this committee. So, and this is particularly surprising considering the history of Los Angeles with immigration and the concentration of a large population of undocumented people, but also close family and friends that are directly being bullied and terrorized by the Trump administration. So for me, I would like to encourage you to pass a sanctuary city policy that minimizes and minimizes any kind of participation with ICE, that provides absolute transparency, that prohibits any kind of data sharing, but also, and again, and I would also suggest moving on some kind of protections from the city.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Doyle. I live in Highland Park. With all due respect to the Chief Legislative Analyst, words do matter, and no, we are not a practicing sanctuary city. As a writer, I love my thesaurus. It can be an invaluable tool in finding the right and true word, but it can also be a tool of evasion. And it appears as he was crafting his executive order, Mayor Garcetti used his own thesaurus to find every conceivable way to avoid uttering the word sanctuary. No, that word is not a magic wand that would erase the terror currently facing immigrant committees, but it is a word with a long and meaningful history in Los Angeles. It is a right and true word, and coupled with strong policy, it would send a clear message of support and solidarity to the immigrant community. The executive order represents important progress, but progress of the cautious, incremental kind. Donald Trump is not moving cautiously or incrementally, and it's time for the City Council to step up to the plate and finish the job. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm the Program Associate from the National Immigration Law Center, and I'm here to urge the City of Los Angeles to create a broad and a universal Los Angeles Justice Fund to provide legal representation to immigrants facing deportation who are unable to afford legal services. The National Immigration Law Center is dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of low-income immigrants. We believe that all people who live in the United States, regardless of their immigration status, national origin, or criminal history, should have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. To do this, all immigrants who are in removal proceedings should have access to a competent attorney who can represent them during these complex proceedings. Within the political climate and administration, the immigrant community is directly being attacked. It is crucial that the City of Los Angeles fight back by helping detain immigrants secure access to attorneys who can help them represent themselves effectively and in their cases. Families are being affected daily, which causes trauma and harm to the children and their partners. All our community members, no matter where they were born, how much money they have, or their criminal record, should be able to live free from being... Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Ng.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Nong. I'm with Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. First of all, we'd like to thank the mayor for really taking a lead and announcing Executive Directive 20, and we really encourage the council to follow up with an ordinance that allows those directives to be implemented, specifically ordinances that prevent collection of unnecessary information about immigration status, protection of private information collected by LA City residents, prohibiting local resources from being used for immigration enforcement, as well as ensuring that the LA Justice Fund is as inclusive as possible. The Justice Fund should really be about fairness and due process for all. Lastly, we encourage the council to endorse SB 54, the California Values Act, as well as SB 31, the California Religious Freedom Act. Thank you.
Joseph Viel from Chirla, Jennifer Canales Belais, and Antonia Ramirez.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Vigela, Director of Policy and Advocacy with Chirla. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the members of this committee for bringing these issues up again for reconsideration. In regards to item number 1, we are in strong support of opposing HR 83, which will punish cities that are defined as sanctuary cities. We know that there's no such definition, and it will be attacked to our city. The other thing in regards to things to consider about how to protect, first we urge this committee to look at the Attorney General of New York opinion piece in regards to how to protect cities, in which he provides guidance to cities regarding sanctuary status. Furthermore, we also urge the city to be part of a suit which is led by the Washington State, who are suing the Trump administration in regards to the definition of sanctuary city. That suit was issued yesterday. And lastly, we also would like to to thank this committee for considering these two issues. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Canales Pelaez, and I'm a staff attorney with Immigrant Defenders Law Center and a directly impacted community member. To the world, my father was just another disposable member of society because of his felony drug conviction. But to me, he is my father, a human being with equitable qualities that deserves to have someone like me fight for him. At the age of 11, I saw my father ripped away from me, and no matter how hard I advocated, at the end of the day, a minor with no legal authority had no right to advocate for him. So we urge you today to uphold the critical due process protections by supporting the LA Justice Fund to ensure that all detained immigrants in deportation proceedings have legal counsels. We cannot accept the exclusion of members of our community from having access to lawyers while they face deportations, especially when the government is represented in every single case. Due process is a fundamental principle which must not be subject to carve-outs. Thank you.
God bless Donald Trump, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Jan Brewer, Pete Wilson, and ICE. Deportations at full throttle. George Soros, a Hungarian Jew, Eric Garcetti, Jerry Brown, Mike Fewer, Hilda Solis, Jackie Lacey, and Mark Ridley Thomas, the above-mentioned corrupted, malicious, unethical, political, pandering pussies, have exercised political and public official malfeasance with reckless disregard for the Constitution and Bill of Rights and the legal law of the land, thereby endangering all legal law-abiding Americans and our beloved United States military veterans who are now homeless thanks to these unlawful sanctuary city policies and its chango shit. Furthermore, these unethical political pandering pussies, Jerry Brown, Eric Garcetti, Mike Fewer, Charlie Beck, Jackie Lacey, took an oath and swore to rightfully preserve, fight, and defend the Constitution. That means not harboring fugitive criminal assholes. What these traitors have done is commit high treason and perpetuate crimes against humanity, they being the legal, law-abiding American citizens and our beloved American military. Thank you.
Carmen Ingoing. Xochitl Hernandez, and Isabel Mejia.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for holding this meeting. My name is Carmen Iguina. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California, and I've spent my time at the ACLU fighting in federal courts to try to establish the right to counsel for people facing removal proceedings. We have seen firsthand the devastation that's caused when someone who's unrepresented goes up against the full force of the federal government. Remember, in every case, there is a trained prosecutor on the other side. This is a question of due process, a question of fairness. The city is not deciding who gets to stay and who gets to go. They basically get to decide that residents of Los Angeles get to have a fair process. And that's why we are here to urge the support of a creation of a fully inclusive LA Justice Fund. It's such an important first step, and it's going to make a difference in so many lives. It's going to keep families together. It's going to keep people here who should be here. And of course, that is only the first part of the problem. I will echo the calls for an ordinance adopting Executive Order 20 and for bias-free policing. Thank you.
I got Xochitl Hernandez and Isabel Mejia. Emmy McLean.
Good afternoon. I first want to acknowledge the importance of Executive Directive 20 as a very important step for the City of LA. And it represents a model policy, I would say, from the mayor's side. We now are in a position where we need action also from the City Council, as others have said, and frankly from LAPD. We've talked about Special Order 40 as an important policy that has existed from 1979, but the reality is 1979 is a long time ago. I know that the policy is limited because of people that I've represented, including Isabel Mejia, who's going to speak next and who's by my side, who is one of 8 people who was picked up and placed in deportation proceedings as a result of an LAPD ICE joint task force that was allegedly going after human traffickers. There was not a single arrest or charge that was related to human trafficking, yet multiple people were deported. Isabel Mejia was on the verge of deportation. So I ask the City Council to act to make sure that the executive directive becomes a policy and that there is a bias-free policing policy that protects immigrants in the city. She needs a translator, though. Is there someone who can translate for her?
See, yes.
Sorry, and I also just want to give some of the documents that we provided to LAPD and to the mayor, to the city council members.
Isabel?
Oh, que sí es, que a veces es injusto lo que hace la policía en el aspecto que no dan como una oportunidad para que tengan el abogado que necesitan o la ayuda que necesiten.
It's unfair that the police does not provide you with an opportunity to have the attorney or the legal help that you need.
Es como abuso de autoridad, se podrá decir,
It's like a type of abuse of authority, you could say.
porque no saben qué está pasando atrás de esa persona.
You never know what's going on behind, what's going on with that person.
Y si no hay ni una felonía o algo más, no veo el caso que tengan que reaccionar de esa manera,
And if there's no felony or something like that, I don't see any reason why they should react in that way.
porque no están dando otra oportunidad más.
Because they're not giving you another opportunity.
Entonces sí es necesario que deben de ver eso, que
So-
tienen que, como que apoyar.
I think that should be considered, and we should get your support. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach Mohammed, Spencer F., and Mario Fuentes from LA Voice. Zach Mohammed, Spencer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Mohammed, and I am the LA organizer for Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And black immigrants are definitely needed to be talked about when it comes to immigration, specifically how there are a lot of disparities that are facing black immigrants, making up 8.7% of the U.S. foreign-born immigrant, but make up 20% of folks who are facing deportation under EIOR. And we really need to make a justice fund that is inclusive of all people, especially people who look like all of you on this council, and definitely making it so that the due process is able to help them fight the deportation case, because these are people who have brought so much wealth beyond just economic means to each of your districts and have built a lot. And basically, as LA is saying that we will resist, if you do make a carve-out, you are basically perpetuating this white supremacy that is prevalent and breaking communities and hurting LA.
Hello, my name is Spencer, and I'm with the Democratic Socialists of America. I've been a little upset with how slow the City Council and the Mayor has been to deal with what we have known was going to be a problem since November. You guys have only met twice to discuss immigration issues publicly, while people are being deported every single day. And I think it's really important to remind everyone that we are making a political choice when you're spending hours debating whether or not it's worth calling yourself a sanctuary city, instead of going forward and actually pursuing policies that will defend the people in our communities. And that is a political choice that we're doing again today, and that the mayor is doing when he waited for so long to even come forward, to even come close to sanctuary policies. And every single day that we wait to actually stop ICE from destroying our families is a day that is destroying another family, another community, and is ruining our ability to live as actual dignified human beings. And thank you.
Gracias por la oportunidad. Thank you for this opportunity. Mario Fuentes with LA Voice. We're an interfaith community organization across the county. Special Order 40. I was a recipient of that Special Order 40 back in 1979. I met with back then Mayor Tom Bradley, and So I'm enjoying the benefits of leadership that take bold actions in moments of crisis like the ones that we're living right now. So I'm a living example of that. Spring forward to 2017. We need leadership to take bold action, just like Mayor Tom Bradley did back then. Special Order 40 needs to be revised, and our community input needs to be addressed into that archaic measure. The LA Justice Fund needs to be afforded and address the needs of all people, not just certain people. And the city attorney, please work expeditiously to look at every way to protect immigrants in our communities. And I'm inviting you, Council, to, like back then in '79, please take bold actions to protect immigrant communities.
I'm done. Colleagues, I'm prepared to move forward with the move forward with the approval of the recommendations presented by the CLA to incorporate the mayor's Special Order 40, to ask the city attorney to report back on more aggressive actions that we can take, including a review of Special Order 40 and to conform and the language, make it more contemporary, and have a review of Special Order 40. And as Mr. Wisad indicated, we are looking for, I guess, the city attorney to review what areas of the law can we move forward on that require us, as a matter of law, to ask someone's legal status. So, for example, he talked about public housing. Those benefits are limited to residents and citizens. And Mr. Wizard would like us to explore how we could amplify those services. I assume there may be other services that the city engages in, probably from the programs we work with HUD, with HSID, that would seem to also require us to provide services only for those who are citizens or legal residents. We should have a review of that as well. Any other points, Mr. Price, Mr. Rue?
Special Order 20, inclusion of Special Order 20.
Correct. We're dealing with both 20 and 40.
Executive Order 20.
Okay. Mr. Price, yes, sir, Mr. Price. Yes.
Is this where we can also ask the LAPD to review the manual to ensure that sections are consistent with current practices? I know the comment was made that the manual is being updated. And I don't know if we need some additional language or make this part of the motion.
Yes.
After meeting, we could just give a full picture of all the policies and procedures that apply to immigration enforcement, because I think there's some confusion about Special Order 40 being sort of four corners of what we can and cannot do, and that would include sort of making sure that all the provisions of the manual are updated.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just want to make sure that what Mr. Weezer and I were trying to convey in terms of the sanctuary city status and what it means to defend ourselves, whether the threats are real or not. I want to make sure that was conveyed and that we're going to come back with an answer in 2 weeks when we schedule our next meeting. Did we capture that? Okay. I just want to make sure because
So you're saying you don't think it needs to be a part of this? Would you rather come back with a fuller description of what's happening in the manual?
We can certainly come back. I mean, we do plan to go through this process. There is an internal process that we have, some which may take some involvement of the LA Police Commission before we can incorporate it. I think what I was offering is, because I know some of the discussion is this needs to be updated or that needs to be updated, I think it may be helpful. I'm simply offering, if you agree, to set forth just what are the policies and procedures of the department consistent with all of the directives, including the new executive directive, so there's a good understanding of that.
I'd be okay with that, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can schedule that for the next meeting to include.
Yes, for the
that
next
discussion.
meeting. I think the interest has been very clear from this committee that we want to go in a very substantive way forward to figure out how we can stop people from being deported. If a declaration was sufficient, I assure you that declaration would have occurred. I have no problems making that declaration on a daily basis, but it is not sufficient enough for us to make declarations. We need to ensure that we are using the resources of the city at every level, our legal resources, our policing resources, our service resources, to protect the residents of the city. And that is more than a declaration. That is an actual reality that our residents of the city are confronted with every single day, and it's not simply enough to make a declaration. We have to put in place an infrastructure. Ms. Martinez, I think that's what you're looking for, is us putting forth a legal infrastructure to be able to respond to the federal government and their abuse and their bullying. I think it's an appropriate phrase for it, of the residents of the city of Los Angeles, and then we're happy to move that forward. That is the order. Can we meet in a week? Are you prepared to come back in a week, or do we need 2 weeks to come back?
I think that representatives from the city attorney's office would be able to meet within a week.
Okay.
Councilmember, for the portion that would you like from LAPD, I'm not available next week, unfortunately, but I can certainly come to a future meeting after that.
Okay. Okay. Be prepared to come back next week. We have to work with our agenda and our schedule. So we look at to meet either in 1 week or in 3 weeks. Be prepared for a week, but we will work with the President of the Council and with the other members of the committee. Okay, ready to move forward? I assume this is a consent matter, right? No objection to the order, so be the order. Item number 3.
Hold on, your audio's not on. Your audio's not on.
We ready? Take 2. The city administrative officer to report relative to the city of Los Angeles contributing to the Los Angeles Justice Fund to provide qualified legal representation to immigrants facing deportation or removal proceedings who are otherwise unable to afford or access legal services. We have CAO staff available, and I believe there are guest staff available as well.
Okay. Please, thank you.
Good afternoon, Yolanda Chavez with the CAO's office. If you'd like the representatives from the California Community Foundation, they're present, so if you want them to come up.
Are they here?
I'm sure they can.
Please join us.
So I'll have them introduce themselves and go into the summary of our recommendations.
And in making your presentation, please, if you may, if you're able to.
Yes.
There's been a lot of discussion about comparing this with New York's Empire State Immigration Defense Fund. And please talk about the origins of our fund and how it relates or does not relate or compare to.
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. So before you today are the CEO's recommendations for the city's proposed contribution to the Los Angeles Justice Fund. As you know, this Justice Fund is proposed to be a partnership between the city and a number of foundations, including the California Community Foundation, or CCF, who will also serve as the administrator for the fund, a number of other Los Angeles-based foundations, and the County of Los Angeles. So in our development of our recommendations, we talked to CCF, the County of Los Angeles, and of course the city attorney to respond to some of the legal questions. So let me start by Let me start with the proposed program framework, and what we're proposing is the minimum eligibility requirements. One of the issues that we had to make sure we addressed, that this proposed $2 million as part of the contribution to the fund was not seen as a gift of public funds. And the way to ensure that that doesn't happen is to require that folks that are served with this funding be residents of the city of Los Angeles. We're recommending that they be residents, and also a preference for those individuals with strong community ties to the city, including family members who are U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA recipients. And the other part of the requirement is that, of course, these residents be low income. And so we're recommending that this include low-income individuals with household incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level. And just to give you a sense of what that means, the household poverty level is defined by household size. So for a family of 4, that would be somebody who, for the household that earns $24,600 or less. In addition, we're proposing that priority services be provided to eligible individuals who are particularly at risk, including heads of households, children and young adults who arrived as children, veterans, individuals with protection-based claims, victims of crimes, victims of domestic violence, of human trafficking, and all individuals who would be entitled to protection under international treaty obligation and other immigration laws. CCF is recommending a number of service types for the fund, including, of course, direct representation, which would be representation of detained immigrants or immigrants who are initially detained and then subsequently released, support services for paralegals, interpreters and witnesses, pro bono coordination and recruitment. So this fund would also leverage private resources through private attorneys and private law firms, and in low bono or low cost representation and referral. So again, being able to contract with attorneys that can provide services at low cost. One of the major recommendations we're making in this report is to prioritize direct representation for detainees. The data shows in one of the studies and reports, we actually footnote in our report that in Los Angeles County, over 60% of the detained immigrants lack legal counsel, compared to 26% of non-detained immigrants. Over that same period of the study, this was a study of over 3 years, they found that people who were represented, or detainees who had legal representation, were more than 5 times as often successful, or succeeded more than 5 times as often, in receiving a bond and being released. Because of the detrimental impact of detentions and deportations, I mean, I don't have to go too much into this explanation, but in terms of the impact of the health and well-being of the individuals and families who are impacted, and also the impact to our region's economy and to our social safety net, we are recommending that at least 70% of the city funds be prioritized for direct representation of detainees. I think if we think about it, these folks that are being arrested and detained, many of them are either the primary or the sole breadwinner for that family. And so as families struggle to survive, and in many cases, the child welfare system has to step in, these children become wards of the state. So it's very costly, not only for families and individuals, but for the county, the state, and the city, as businesses as well lose workers and have to bear the cost of this turnover. The other major issue that we were asked to address was eligibility based on criminal history, and this, of course, as you heard, I think, from public comment, was extremely difficult to come to consensus. And so what we're recommending is that we mirror the language in California Senate Bill 6 or SB 6, which is legislation that would create a similar fund as the LA Justice Fund to ensure consistency with the state, and added some additional language as proposed. So the language at this point is that under the city's contribution for the LA Justice Fund, services may not be provided to an individual who has been convicted of or who is currently appealing a conviction for a violent felony, as defined in subdivision C of section 667.5 of the California Penal Code, and or a conviction for human trafficking, child abuse, domestic violence, and or pimping, and the legal services provider has determined that the individual has no potentially meritorious claim for relief or defense from removal. On page 7, we very clearly state the public purpose for this fund. It is important to ensure, again, so that we're not using these gifts or these funds as a gift, that we state the public purpose for the funds, which is to really protect families from unfair immigration actions and to protect the city's thriving economy. The majority of the immigrant population in the city are longtime residents and represent an important part of Los Angeles' economic engine. The city cannot afford the cost resulting from detention and deportation-related actions. This immigrant population must feel safe and supported when accessing city facilities, programs, and in their interactions with law enforcement. By providing funding for legal representation, the city will continue to foster public safety and the city's economy. We also outline the funding source and our recommended disbursement schedule for that funding source if you approve it. The only source the city can use is general fund, so only general fund dollars. We cannot use any type of special funds for this purpose. CCF anticipates that the legal fund will be a 2-year program starting July 1st, 2017. So based on that, we are recommending that we allocate the $2 million commitment based on expenditures and performance on the following schedule that we outlined on page 5 of the report, with the first $500,000 allocation slated for sometime around July 15th of this year. The rest of that page outlines some of our proposed terms for the agreement, and you should know that both for the proposed terms of the agreement and the recommendations for oversight and reporting, we've been coordinating closely with the County of Los Angeles, and if you approve us moving forward to negotiate the final agreement, we will continue to do so. But we do feel that the terms we're proposing and the recommendations for oversight and reporting will ensure that there's accountability and oversight of these funds. Lastly, CCF will be procuring an independent evaluator to evaluate the program starting a year after the program starts, to really assess the program's efficiency and fiscal and economic impact. Starting on page 6 and 7, we respond to a number of legal questions that were raised by the Budget Committee as they heard this motion. So one, again, is the issue of the gift of public funds, which we're responding to. It's not a gift of public funds as long as the participants who get free legal assistance are city residents and low income. The sole source issue, and we're recommending that you make the findings outlined on page 7 to ensure that we can enter into an agreement with CCF. And then the last question we had from the Budget Committee was legal liability, in terms of if the city is providing funding for legal representation, are we liable for that service? And the response is that providing legal funding for legal representation is generally afforded, or the city would be afforded immunity under Government Code sections 815.4 and 820.2. The last recommendation that we have is that you give us an exemption for Charter 22, although this 1022. Although the city attorney did not feel it was necessary, we just thought it's just out of an abundance of caution, we should go ahead and request that. So going back to our recommendations, we are requesting today that you authorize the city administrative officer to negotiate and execute an agreement for a one-year term with 2 one-year options to extend with the California Community Foundation in the amount not to exceed $2 million, dispersed on the schedule we have outlined in this report for the Los Angeles Justice Fund, subject to the city attorney as to form and legality. We're asking that you approve the proposed program framework, eligibility requirements, recommended priorities for the fund, including prioritizing at least 70% of the city funds for the provision of legal services for individuals who are detained and who are otherwise unable to afford or have access to legal services and the proposed agreement terms. And that you approve the sole source findings as outlined in this report on page 7 to enter into an agreement with the California Community Foundation to administer the Los Angeles Justice Fund. And finally, to authorize an exemption from Charter Section 1022 as described in this report. So with that, we're available to answer questions.
Okay. Mr. Rice.
Thank you. Thanks for the hard work and for this, the precedent-setting nature of this fund. I think it's certainly a very positive development. You referenced adhering to the language in, was it Senate Bill 6 or something? There was some, and I guess that goes directly to serving individuals who have been convicted of crimes. Could you just kind of go through that section again, what you're recommending?
Sure. So what we're recommending is language that mirrors the current language in SB 6, which basically says that individuals, that services through our funding may not be provided to individuals who have been convicted or who are currently appealing a conviction for a violent felony, as defined in the state penal code subdivision C of section 667.5. And we're also adding some additional categories. So that's a difference between this language and the state. The state's language only addresses the violent felony section and penal code 667.5. The language we're proposing also adds convictions for human trafficking, child abuse, domestic violence, and/or pimping. And that's on the bottom of page 4 of the report.
Mr. Rue?
I have a few questions.
Ms. Martinez, please.
So how does the fund interact with the proposed state fund under SB 6? Do we know how
At this
going
point,
to interact?
So our understanding of, at this point, we're not sure how it's going to interact. We're assuming that the state is going to be doing the same thing in terms of having a lead state agency contract with qualified legal providers. CCF is going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be issuing a request for proposal to qualified legal services providers that would then be selected and would provide the services. But at this point, we don't know if the state's plan is to have, if cities or counties can apply for that funding. We're not sure at this point.
Mm-hmm. And that's precisely where I was asking, is because realistically, how many people can the $10 million fund actually help? And can we access some of that state money to be able to increase the amount of representation here in Los Angeles?
So and I'll have the representative from CCF respond if they wish, but my understanding on the average cost per case is about $5,000. So if we're going to take that figure, we would probably serve or be able to provide services to 400 cases with our money.
I'm sorry, I don't think your mic is on. I didn't hear you. Repeat
Okay.
that one more time.
So our understanding is the average cost of a case is about $5,000. So with the city's contribution we'd be able to serve about 400 individuals or 400 cases. But if
With
CCF,
our 2 million, with the city's $2
with the
million.
city's money. So I'll have the representative from
Sure.
CCF respond if they have additional information on the state fund.
Sure. Thank you. My name's Efrain Escobedo, Vice President of Civic Engagement and Public Policy with the California Community Foundation. And Council Member, what I will say from SB 6 and our conversations with the state is that one, $10 million is not enough, neither is $12 million, which is what the state is considering. So I think there's been a lot of push and conversation for how much can we augment it. It is a start, though, and it is about investing in the infrastructure. We know that there's much needed resources right now. The state, in their bills, has contemplated, one, the ability to raise more funds and have private philanthropy contribute even to the state fund. And they're also contemplating looking at and potentially funding jurisdictions that have started local matching programs or that are doing things like the LA region is doing, which is pooling resources and where they could see greater impact by contributing to that. Again, when you look at other jurisdictions and other regions like the Central Valley, the Inland Valley, and Riverside and San Bernardino, and then you consider LA, $12 million will be a drop in the bucket, but I think our 10 here will go a long way towards at least being able to leverage whatever could be contributed by the state here to the region.
And once we set up the fund, have you begun conversations about how individuals would have access to representation? Have you already begun to outline what that looks like?
We have, and I'll defer to Felicia Escobar, who's been working with a lot of our partners and also both city, county, but also a number of the organizations here to start talking about that and how we leverage and get that done.
Great. Thank you so much. My name, again, is Felicia Escobar. I'm a consultant right now with the California Community Foundation, helping them with the LA Justice Fund and other partners, the county and other philanthropic partners to help move forward with the fund. We've been talking to a number of different people around the country who are also thinking about creating similar funds or who have already started funds, and also have been talking to our partners here at the community level who are already providing direct legal representation or legal service, affirmative legal services to people. I think the way, obviously we want to see what comes in with the request for proposals, but I think what we would contemplate, particularly for the detained immigrant population, individuals, lawyers would either be going to detention facilities on a regular basis and doing Know Your Rights presentations and doing legal consultations with individuals, helping them determine whether they would actually want to take advantage of the services of this fund and whether people meet the requirements. I think that the two kind of avenues, particularly to reach the detained population, would be detention facilities. The other avenue would be working with the immigration courts to understand when the detained immigration docket takes place, and presenting in a similar way that they would do at a detention facility, coordinating with the courts to present their services and do legal consultations with people who are on the docket that day, and then those individuals would then decide whether they want the services.
And I think in terms operationally, it would be, and I think it was mentioned in the CAO's report, is prioritizing organizations that, one, have access and been doing removal work in the detention centers, who have great, tremendous experience in working in the LA section of immigration courts here in the region. And those will be the organizations, I think, who have been doing decades of work on that. That will be our greatest avenue to reaching the populations that we want to do. So it's prioritizing those organizations to apply and be part of this fund, because we know that is the best way that we'll be able to reach those populations.
Right, and this is Rosie Arroyoso with the California Community Foundation, and just want to share that, definitely the capacity, right, is a big challenge and something that we've been very cognizant and have had a lot of conversations about. So that's why we added a component that looks for innovative strategies to expand pro bono services, and looking at those strategic partnerships is going to be another area of the fund we'll look at.
Can you also talk about how does our intake process differ from the Universal Representation Fund in New York? How is that going to differ from what we're trying to do here and what the state is trying to do? Do you know the difference?
I would
Can you
defer
talk about
to
what their
CAO,
intake
if not
process looks
Felicia,
like?
who's done some of that research on doing that.
Sure. I mean, I think that, what we have heard from advocates and from people around the country who've run similar programs like New York, that it's important to create as streamlined a process as possible. So as streamlined of requirements as possible, and eligibility criteria, so that they're not spending too much time going through all what could be decades-long history of someone's life in the United States, but are asking some pretty simple, direct questions that could then very quickly determine whether they're eligible or not. So, I imagine that we will have to work this out once we understand what the parameters are and who we will be selecting as grantees. But I imagine that they're going to have kind of a checklist of eligibility requirements that they go through in their individual consultations with people.
The unique opportunity that I think we have, that we strongly urge this body and the council to support, is the idea of aligning our frameworks with what the state is doing, what the county is doing, and what the city is doing. Because the one thing, New York is a city and county. Right. We're separate entities, and the state is coming in behind what the city and county were doing. Here we have an opportunity to put forth a framework that should and must align with what the state's legal framework or their processes that they put forward, what the city puts forward, and what the county put forward. So the recommendation to align or mirror SB 6, we strongly support and think that is the way to go, because we want to create a framework or a program that is defendable, that is sustainable, and serves as many people as possible. And I think this is one solid way to do that, and one clear distinction from how New York has evolved. We have an opportunity to learn from that and do it right from the outset with full alignment.
Mr. Chair, I actually want to speak about how you've tried to get us to this place. I know it's not fast enough. We never move fast enough, unfortunately, in the city of LA. How realistic is it for us to take the next step and have these monies accessible to folks that really need it? What's a realistic timeline?
So if you approve our recommendations today, our goal would be to start finalizing the agreement with CCF along with the county to be ready to make the first allocation in July.
Okay. So the beginning
within
of
the first 2
year?
weeks, right.
So after this, it's being referred to budget as far as I understand, correct?
Correct.
As soon as it gets out of committee. And I also wanted to commend Mr. Cedillo. I know he's received a number of phone calls from a lot of our advocates and friends on this issue. I feel very, very strongly, being the only woman on the city council, being the only mom on the city council, I feel very strongly about ensuring that anyone with history of heinous crimes against children and women not have access to this fund. I really believe that. My history in working with victims of child abuse takes me back to my LA Unified School days, where we couldn't pass a piece of legislation in Sacramento because we couldn't find anybody with courage to stand up against the adult agenda and say any adult that is caught molesting, causing sexual assault on a child, hitting a child, or introducing drugs to a child should not be working for the school districts, period. I found it very, very challenging at that time that I couldn't find one person in Sacramento that would say, you're absolutely right, people like that shouldn't be around children. So I take this cause very seriously. Human trafficking victims are victims that I see every single day. A lot of these children are black girls, children of color who nobody cares about in this country, unfortunately, because if we did, we would take this seriously and do everything we could to bring some of these predators to justice. So I feel very strongly, gentlemen, about protecting these victims, ensuring that these victims are treated like victims. If they are caught up in any type of situation where they're being forced to sell their bodies for money because someone is pimping them in our city, then those children and those women and those folks caught up in that situation should be protected, and they should have an access to representation. But any adult that's caught doing any type of these heinous crimes against children and women shouldn't. And I feel it's on my core of what I believe we should do. And so I know, Mr. Chair, that you've taken a lot of meetings and so on, and so I appreciate your advocacy, but I just need to ensure that that's going to remain the case. Like I said, people who are here trying to earn a good living, people who are simply just caught using a false social security card because they're trying to work and make ends meet for their families, those people should be at the front of the line. Those people should have access to representation. But someone who's abusing children, have been convicted for these heinous crimes, I don't believe should. I think we have a very small opportunity, very, very little resources. I wish we had more to be able to represent more people. I think folks like that just shouldn't have access to this type of money and shouldn't have access to the representation. Everyone has the right to due process, but people who have been convicted for these heinous crimes should pay, should spend their time in jail and pay for the crimes that they have committed, and should not be at the front of the line when it comes to accessing representation to be here legally. I really believe that, gentlemen, and I again, Mr. Cedillo, I know you've taken a lot of meetings on this issue, but I think we need to move forward. And whatever we need to do to implement and make it accessible for people to get representation, we should do as soon as we can. But I appreciate your work on this. I really do.
Thank you. Let me add to that you are the voice of young women, girls, women in the council. You should be commended for that, and I applaud that. I admire that. And this has been a challenge for all of us in the audience and here up on the dais to balance and find the right balance between those things that we find universally abhorrent and our commitment to due process. I want to commend those who have worked with the legislature to craft the carve-out language that I think meets both your concerns and meets our concerns, our concerns as a group, because I think the language is thoughtful. I applaud. I don't know who the attorneys were who worked on the craftsmanship of the language, but I applaud their efforts, and am comfortable that we are assuring that the concerns that you have been addressed at the same time that the concerns that others have and that we have about the limits of the fund, which in itself is restrictive, and the balance between our commitments to due process, which I think are being afforded, but are done so in a way that is very thoughtful and not wasteful of these precious dollars. We have a man from my district, Mr. Romulo, who is sitting in a place where he should not be, and I don't doubt that there's anyone here who would say that resources should be spent on people engaged in heinous crimes for which there's no possibility for them to get out, that we should waste resources on them and not bring home fathers like Mr. Romulo Hernandez. So I'm prepared to take public comment and move this conversation forward. Patricia Suarez, are you here? I have Patricia Suarez. Carmen, I know I'm mispronouncing your name, but Carmen from the ACIU in Going. Xochitl Hernandez. Peter Colopy. Let's start there. Okay.
Interpreter, up here, please.
Patricia Suarez? See?
My name is Patricia Suarez.
Yo soy una madre y mujer de fe.
I am a mother and a woman of faith.
Yo cuando llegué a este país,
Un momentito, no se puede oír. El micrófono, por favor. Acérquese al micrófono, señora, por favor.
sí, cuando yo llegué a este país,
When I came to this country,
llegué buscando una oportunidad con mis hijos.
I came looking for an opportunity with my children.
Llegué con la gran admiración de que en este país íbamos a ser protegidos,
I came with a great admiration, in this country we were going to be protected
porque siempre ha existido la ley.
because law has always existed.
Pero ahorita uno de mis hijos está en orden de deportación
But currently one of my sons has an order of deportation.
y a pesar de eso yo no he perdido la fe.
In spite of that, I have not lost my faith.
Yo soy víctima y sobreviviente de violencia doméstica
I am a victim of survivor also of domestic violence.
y desgraciadamente los hijos agarran esos patrones.
Unfortunately, the children acquire those patterns.
Pero gracias a la justicia y un juez, mi hijo fue requerido a una organización donde él lo ayudaron a rehabilitarse.
But thanks to justice and the judge, my son was referred to an organization that helped him to recover, rehabilitate. Sorry.
Cuando yo llegué a migración y que me dijeron que mi hijo iba a ser deportado inmediatamente,
When I got to immigration and they told me that my son was going to be immediately deported,
yo siempre supe que había justicia aquí.
I always knew there was justice here.
No teníamos los recursos, pero en ese camino los encontramos.
We didn't have the resources, but we found them along the way.
Seguimos luchando
We keep fighting,
y seguiré luchando para que él se quede aquí.
and I will keep fighting so that he can stay here.
Solo pido a ustedes, como nuestros representantes,
I just ask you as our representatives
que no retiren, que no tengan el miedo de que sigamos siendo santuarios
not to be fearful of us to continue being sanctuary.
y que así como yo no he tenido miedo para luchar,
And just as I have not been fearful to fight,
tampoco ustedes tengan miedo para seguir luchando
you also don't be fearful of
ante esas presiones que estamos siguiendo los inmigrantes de persecución.
Don't be fearful of fighting against that persecution that we are facing of being immigrants.
Y yo pienso que ya es tiempo que ustedes como representantes paren esas máquinas,
I think that it's time for you as our representative to stop those machines.
porque yo me pregunto, si ICE quiere deportar a tanto inmigrante,
Because I ask myself, if ICE wants to deport so many immigrants,
pues al rato no va a haber trabajo para ICE, ni tampoco va a haber cárceles,
then there's not going to be no more work for ICE or even prisons,
porque ya no va a haber inmigrantes y no va a haber dinero. ¿Quién genere todos esos taxes?
there's not going to be anybody who provides funds for those taxes or those jails,
Y tampoco va a haber retiros para las futuras generaciones.
and there's going to be no retirement for the future generations.
Es todo lo que yo puedo decir. Muchas gracias por escucharme. Y seamos unas personas de lucha sin darnos por derrotarnos por ningún miedo de nada.
Thank you for listening to me, and let's be people who are willing to fight and never give up without fear.
Thank you. My name is Peter Colopy. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and a supporter of ICE out of LA. I want to speak first of all in favor of due process for all, which was the initial title of SB 6 before it was revised to include carve-outs and went on to become a model for local policy. I believe that in the case of criminal proceedings, we would all agree that even those who are guilty should have the right to a defense attorney, and I would like to suggest that we apply the same logic and the same consideration for the rights of all of our neighbors in the case of immigration proceedings. I also want to suggest, following up on the conversation earlier, and particularly on Councilman Huizar's suggestions and request for input from the city attorney's office, that if I were in your shoes, I would ask the city attorney to consider something like the following language and to consider the legal and public policy ramifications of it. City agencies shall not collect information on the immigration status of any individual or provide such information to any entity,
Thank you.
regardless of...
You want to, if you have something more specific, we can take it at the side and be happy to have that conversation with you. Thank you. Carmen, ACLU of Southern California. Xochitl Hernandez. That was Peter. Kathy Dreyfus. Hello.
Hello, my name is Kathy Dreyfus. I'm a staff attorney at Immigrant Defenders Law Center. I'm a criminal defense attorney for the last 35 years. And I can't tell you how pleased I am that finally, the governments at all levels are considering funding for representation in immigration. I've been a practitioner in immigration and criminal defense, and I can tell you that it is the most important thing to have due process applied to people in immigration court. In criminal court, we say that punishment, imprisonment is a liberty interest, and that when the state wants to take away the liberty of an individual, that the Constitution requires representation. I've often said to people that what is the difference between deportation and banishment from the United States, from your family, from everything you know? Isn't that also a liberty interest? And so finally, we are looking at allowing representation for people in immigration proceedings as inclusive as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maya Gamez, Lindsey Toslowski, Amira Milo, and Victor Niblas.
Hello, my name is Myra Gomez, and I'm an immigrant and an immigration attorney at IMDA. I'm government appointed to represent immigrants who are found mentally incompetent to represent themselves in immigration proceedings and are detained. As a result, I'm a frequent visitor to Adelanto Detention Center, which is about 2 hours outside of Los Angeles and privately owned. Everybody there has a price, making someone's pockets fatters. Conditions are deplorable, food is scarce, and I've been told that prison is better. Immigration is complicated, even for an immigration attorney. For many who are stripped from their families, the sole breadwinners and laborers, and may be illiterate in their native language, let alone fluent in English, the odds are heavily stacked against them. No self-help materials are provided. This is not due process. Bonds are denied on a daily basis. This is not due process. Judges who are overwhelmed with their docket and refuse a continuance to allow someone to get an attorney or get help filling out applications are denied and deported. This is not due process. I urge you to take a stand and for once provide this marginalized population with an opportunity to have a fair trial where the outcome is the difference between another family being torn apart and denied the opportunity of life, liberty, and justice. Thank you.
Lindsey.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lindsey Toslowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. And like you, Councilmember Martinez, I'm a mom. I also spent 2 years fighting for the rights of foster children as an attorney with the Children's Law Center of Los Angeles. So I certainly understand your concerns and have seen firsthand up close the effects of child abuse that can occur. But I've also seen that this is a cycle, and oftentimes my children, my clients who were in that system and who were foster children, who were victimized, who were trafficking victims, would grow up and sometimes as young adults make mistakes and get convictions that end up in situations, end up in deportation. And what we want to ensure is that we look at this fund as something where no one is beyond redemption, where the same abused child who grows up and makes a mistake still has the right to due process and who has the right to have somebody standing with them. Our goal at Immigrant Defenders Law Center and the whole coalition that has been pushing for this is that no immigrant should stand alone. Thank you.
Maria Melo, Victor Nieblas, Gilbert Salcedo, James Burson, and Ana Garcia.
Thank you very much. My name is Victor Nieblas. I am from the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I'm the immediate past president at the national level. I also teach immigration law at Loyola Law School. Our sister organization in Washington, D.C., the American Immigration Council, recently published a report, Access to Counsel in Immigration Court, and their findings were from 2007 to 2012, only 37% of respondents had attorneys, while in detention, only 14 had representation. And what was most strikingly about the report was only 2% of people who did not have attorneys were able to avoid deportation. So hence, the need for representation is clear. With the new initiatives by the administration that would widen the web as to who they can arrest, I would highly recommend that the council and the committee be as inclusive as possible in this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gilbert Salcedo.
Good afternoon. Gilbert Salcedo. I'm a co-president of the National Lawyers Guild and also a member of the LA Coalition for Universal Representation. Thank you for having this meeting and allow us to address you. I want to start by saying that the LA Coalition for Universal Representation is a broad coalition of over 70 groups, community groups, nonprofit groups, and collectively we have a pretty good grasp of what the residents of LA want because we deal with them on a daily basis. And what we're hearing regularly is that the people of LA want an LA Justice Fund that is truly universal without all these carve-outs. And the carve-outs being proposed are too broad. They're too broad. They're too, I understand they want to exclude certain people, but it's too broad. I think 1 minute is too short of a period to address this in detail. So I would welcome the opportunity to meet privately with each one of the council members present to discuss this as to tailor language is more adequate.
Thank you. James Burson. Ana Garcia.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Ana Garcia, and I'm here on behalf of the Central American Resource Center and on behalf of the communities of Pico Union and Westlake. We would like to urge this committee to uphold critical due process protections for our communities by supporting the LA Justice Fund without exclusion of any segment of our community. Every year, Carecen helps hundreds of victims obtain U visas, many who have criminal convictions of their own. And these victims often obtain these convictions because in the dispute with their abusers, they also become charged with domestic violence. And they often plead guilty so that they can get out of jail and return to their children and families. These are the folks who we most want to protect with these funds, but who will currently be excluded with the current carve-out. So we urge you to please allow for the most inclusive eligibility possible for these funds. Thank you.
Talia Inlander or Inlendler? Tingler. Talia Tingler. Zach Mohammed. Dr. Talia Tingler. Zach Mohammed. And then Emmy McLean. McLean or McLean? Okay, please.
My name is Talia Inlander. I'm a senior staff attorney at Public Counsel, and I run our immigration detention work. 8 years ago, I met Jose Franco at a local immigration detention center. He was 29 years old, but had the mental capacity of a young child. He had been transferred after a felony assault with a deadly weapons conviction for throwing a rock. He was then held in immigration custody for 5 years because he had no access to legal counsel to help him navigate that system. You asked earlier what was the difference between the New York and LA programs. The New York program would have included Jose Franco, so would the new San Francisco program. The LA program would not. This would be the first program in the country to decide that some people are more deserving of due process than others. I urge you to fund this initiative and to fund it as inclusively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
Emmy McLean. I'm a lawyer with the National Day Labor Organizing Network and part of the broad coalition in support of universal representation. We are thrilled to see the leadership that has come with the creation of the LA Justice Fund and encourage the support for it, but we are definitely concerned about the limitations that are being placed on it. As Dr. Inlander just described, the New York Immigrant Family Unity Program was based on fundamental due process principles. Everyone who showed up at immigration court had a right to an attorney. It was not a system that was designed to exclude people. That's where we should be. That's where the city of Los Angeles should be. Donald Trump has decided that good people can stay, and people who he determines are bad can be kicked to the border without a second thought. This should not be this city's position. We understand the sensitivities around child abuse and domestic violence and people who have criminal convictions, but to exclude people from having a lawyer because of a past conviction is to doubly punish those who are most often vulnerable. We must stand with those who are facing the full wrath of the xenophobic policies that are coming from the government. Thank you.
Zach Mohammed, Jennifer Canales Elais, and David Abud.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Canales Peláez, and I just wanted to emphasize the importance of having an attorney by sharing a little bit more of my story. When I was 11 years old, my father was placed in deportation proceedings for a felony drug conviction. We unfortunately were not able to pay for an attorney, but I took it upon myself to arduously fight and advocate for him on his behalf. I contacted lawyers, judges, state attorneys, and I finally took his case up to the First Lady at the time, Laura Bush. But unfortunately, my words meant nothing because I had no legal authority. And this is why, all feelings aside, this is a matter of fairness and due process, and no one should have to face imprisonment or exile without a lawyer. Had my father had someone like me standing by his side that day, he probably would still be here. Thank you.
Again, my name is David Abud. I actually used to work for the New York Family Unity Project, NYFUP, as a paralegal, and I can tell that the only criteria for eligibility that we had at NYFUP was that someone could not afford an attorney. Having these kind of carve-outs that Councilmember Martinez is suggesting would be deeply regressive, as it would be the first program in the country that would be doing this and would set a precedent for other programs to do the same. When we talk about people, what is universally abhorrent, what's universally abhorrent is that people like Patricia's son do not have representation, and that her grandson is going to have her father taken away if he does not win his immigration case solely because they cannot afford an attorney. That is universally abhorrent, and that is what the city council needs to be standing up against. When you are talking about having these kind of carve-outs, it is people like Patricia's family that you are leaving out, that you are punishing a second time. It is these kind of people that you are excluding from something that should be about justice and should not be about moral issues here. Thank you.
Next speaker, Zach Mohammed. Is he here? Brett Steers, or Brett Shears. Emmett Rivers. Is Emmett Rivers here? Emmett Rivers is not here. Edna Monroy. Edna Monroy is not here. Edna, are you here? Megan Ortiz. Is Megan Ortiz here? Come on up. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Councilwoman Martinez. My name is Brett Shears. My fiance volunteers on the Rape and Battery Hotline as a peace over violence volunteer. And as Lindsey Toslowski was saying, one thing that she's learned over time is that this problem of domestic violence and abuse is part of a cycle. It's endemic in certain cultures and communities, and it's a huge problem, and I recognize it, and I recognize the value in you singling it out, and I think your work around it is very important. But we are doubly punishing this community when we carve them out and we exclude them from due process. If I've learned anything from my fiance about her work, it's that, and I don't know if you know this, but that hotline, it's not just victims of domestic violence who can call in, it's also perpetrators. It's people who feel that they have done something wrong and know, and it's an important point to not single them out. And
Thank you. You were Brett Shears, correct? Emmett Rivers and Edna Monroy?
Yes.
Are you
Hi.
Edna?
Yes, Edna. I actually would like to mention really quick that person over there is actually harassing our community members.
Who are you referring to?
That person over there with the pink.
Ms. Ramirez, I'm going to ask you to please not interfere with our public. You will also have your chance to. Okay. Thank you. You've been warned once, Ms. Ramirez. I'm going to ask you to please be respectful and let the speaker speak. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Edna Monroy, and I actually would like to talk a little bit about some of the community members that were deported because they did not have access to a fair trial, to an attorney to support them. I would like to talk about Olivia, who was deported last November and left her 4 U.S. citizen children here who are have now been taken over by foster care homes. So that's just one case. Marta from Honduras that was also deported last year, and she did not have any support going through her asylum case. She obviously ran away from violence in Honduras. And also I would like to talk about my uncle who was actually deported. And so that same uncle is here again, but unfortunately he is obviously priority for deportation. He did not have access to a fair trial, and he did not have access to any legal support. So these are some of the few people that we know that need due process for all, and we need LA to really take a stance and provide that for everyone, not just the
Good afternoon. Thank you again. My name is Megan Ortiz. I just want to caution the council, especially this committee, to not inadvertently sort of repeat the good versus bad immigrant narrative that we hear coming from the current federal administration when we talk about carve-outs. I also think it's really important to note that we can't act like the criminal legal system does not have an issue with racial profiling, that it does not have an issue with wrongfully convicting Black and brown people. I too am a mother, I'm a woman, I'm also a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault, but I also believe in due process for all. Thank you.
Walter Nichols, Scott Doyle, and Nina Torres.
Good afternoon again. My name is Nina Torres, and I'm from National Immigration Law Center. It's important for Los Angeles to be a leader in this fight and help its residents to have essential legal representation to prevent families from being torn apart. Los Angeles is a city of immigrants and should protect its immigrant population. Everyone in LA should have equal access to an attorney and not be denied legal representation. Thank you for your time, and I hope you commit to funding the universal legal representation for the immigrant community.
Scott Doyle, Walter Nichols, Anthony Ng, Joseph, Antonio Ramirez.
Good afternoon again. My name is Anthony Nang with Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. First of all, we're really thankful that this fund is actually being set up. But further, we urge this committee to uphold critical due process protection by supporting the LA Justice Fund and working to ensure that all detained immigrants in deportation proceedings have legal counsel. This is a matter of fairness and due process. No one should face imprisonment and exile without a lawyer, especially when the federal government is represented by an attorney in every case. Many people who have valid claims to stay in the United States are ripped apart from their loved ones and communities simply because they did not have a lawyer to argue their case. We cannot accept the exclusion of members of our communities from having access to lawyers while they face deportation. Due process is a fundamental principle which must not be subjected to carve-outs. Thank you.
Thank you. These wetbacks, changa wetbacks and gangbangers are the true aggressors and provoke fights. They falsely accuse you and mob lynch you incessantly, especially when you're not on their side. I'm sitting over there. Watch carefully to the video and see who is attacking who. So before you judge me unjustly, look to see who's mob lynching me for what I stand and fight for, because it cost me everything living on the streets. Can you do the same? Now, no illegal wetback and Chango Latino gangbang pussies or other third world illegals will qualify for free legal assistance because they broke federal immigration laws. They are felons. That means that they have no legal standing whatsoever. I don't care if LA secures outside legal hacks or pro bono legal assholes. We legal law-abiding Americans will not unlawfully defend these undesirables who again have committed heinous crimes against legal law-abiding citizens. Furthermore, these legal hacks and schmucks and shysters don't do anything for free. They stick it to the people. And again, the true victims are the American people and military, not these wetbacks and gangbangers.
Joseph, please.
My name is Joseph Vigela on behalf of CHIRLA, Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. Early in the year, a group called the New American Economy released a study indicating the contributions of immigrants in LA County. It indicated that immigrants contribute $3.2 billion in taxes in the city of Los Angeles, so we have to make sure that we also invest in their integration in the city of Los Angeles, but then also in legal services. We are concerned in regards to the carve-out for the following reasons. First, our state has moved towards a criminal justice that works, that is smart instead of tough. We have passed Proposition 57, Proposition 47, as well as reducing the maximum sentence of misdemeanors by 1 day to avoid all this issue in regards to immigration consequences. In addition to that, even though you may have committed or convicted of a crime, you may qualify for a remedy, and this carve-out would limit that assistance for those individuals. We understand the concerns in regards to public safety. However, we strongly believe that immigrants are penalized twice, one because of the conviction and then an enhancement in regards to immigrant consequences. So for that, we are concerned, but we applaud that this is the first step to trying to provide due process for all. Thank you.
Isabel Mejia. Betty Haspado and Meath K. Sony, Amelia Arnacha, and I think this is Sujkia Kerwin.
Mi nombre es Isabel.
My name is Isabel.
Una experiencia similar.
I had a similar
Propia
experience.
mía. Yo fui detenida en un centro de detención y no podía agarrar abogado, ¿verdad?
I was in a detention center and I could not get an attorney.
Lo mismo pasa tal vez con otras personas.
Perhaps the same thing is happening with other
A veces no
people.
se fijan del daño que pueden hacer a las otras personas a través de nosotros, nuestra familia.
Perhaps the damage to other people that are behind us is not measured.
Como yo tenía 3 niños chiquitos, son ciudadanos de aquí.
I have 3 children who are citizens. They're little.
Y la otra no, pero o sea, hay a veces que por lo mismo que no tenemos así como el abogado que no nomás yo, toda la gente que tiene que tener como pues esa opción para que tengan o para defenderse.
One of them is not, but like me, that I didn't have an attorney, and all people should have that opportunity to defend themselves.
Porque aparte es un daño psicológico y el daño también que están haciendo a todos, no nomás a uno, también a los niños.
Because there's psychological damage not only to myself, to one person, but also to the children, to
Y
all.
supuestamente si ustedes se enfocan a veces en las escuelas, a mí a veces todo eso baja en todos aspectos emocionalmente, tanto como para los que están adentro, para los que están afuera.
If we focus on the schools, that affects everyone, not only the ones who are inside, but also those who are on the outside.
Y no piensan en el daño así, por eso está bien que todos tengamos como el derecho de tener un abogado.
And maybe the damage is not being considered, so I think everyone should have the right to an attorney.
Porque cada quien sabe en qué economía están o X cosa,
Every person knows where they are economically or whatever.
para evitar las deportaciones y a separar muchas cosas, independiente aparte de como pues, política y todo eso.
To avoid deportation and independently of politics or whatever.
Porque de ahí viene toda la violencia con las
And that's where violence results in children because they're being left alone. Thank you.
Betty?
Hi, my name is Betty, and I think that everybody needs justice for all. I mean, I'm undocumented myself, and I've been living here 30 years, and I think everybody who's facing deportation, they should have a representation. Me as undocumented, I've been paying taxes for 30 years. A lot of people, they've been paying taxes too. So I think a lot of people who've been detained and is undocumented, they don't have the right to have their taxes back. So why we couldn't represent with our taxes? I mean, we are not asking for the city to give us that money. I think it's something that we deserve and something that we don't qualify. I'm a mother, undocumented mother, and I have a mixed family. I have a U.S. citizen daughter and a U.S. resident daughter and one documented. So, sorry.
The whole list.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Amelia Barnachia from the Filipino Worker Center, and what I'm sharing is that what I read in the newspaper, that these immigrants are already in here. Why are they still being deported? Instead of letting them deported, why not let them pay their share so that they come here so that they can help their family for the education of their children? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Meeth Soni, and I'm a directing attorney at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. We're one of the largest deportation defense providers, and we're located here in Los Angeles. Actually, on behalf of IMDEF, we would like to acknowledge and say that we're very pleased with the fact that both the city, the county, and the mayor have committed to providing funds for indigent immigrants who are detained. On that note, I really want to echo Ms. Chavez's recommendation that the priority for this fund needs to go to indigent detained immigrants. I'm sure you're aware that this week a detainee had committed suicide in Adelanto. I believe we have a moral responsibility to ensure that those who are detained in Adelanto have the right to due process, and that they're not being forced to choose between their right to fight their cases and be able to reunite with their families, and whether they'll have access to representation. So I urge the city and council members to please make this fund inclusive and ensure due process for all. Thank you.
Megan Choi? Colleagues? Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Mr.
Oh, this is Megan? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Megan Choi. I'm representing Ground Game LA. I would just like to ask the council for future forums on this topic be held in the evening so it's more open to the community that might affect it most. As we all already know, criminality is just a concept that keeps the most vulnerable in a cycle of oppression. We should no longer be having this conversation about how to penalize those who need our support the most. And while we're wrestling with this idea of how to deal with the fascist Trump administration, we should be really thinking about pushing funding further into the organizations that are already out there supporting and educating people about their rights, and making sure that they are aware of the tactics that ICE is using to unfairly and predatorily scoop up people when they're just trying to conduct normal business. I urge the council to move swiftly and inclusively. Due process is an obvious concept, and it should be upheld for all. Thank you.
Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to really thank all the speakers, all the attorneys, all the organizations who are partnering with us to fight in this fight for immigration. And But most importantly, I want to thank the community members who took the time to come here today, many who are very courageous in sharing their stories at risk to themselves, and which expresses the urgency and how important this issue is. I just really want to thank all of you. And I really want to thank our chairman, Councilmember Cedillo, and Councilmember Nuri Martinez. I know they've been working on this together for a long time. I really want to thank the CAO for bringing these list of recommendations, and I'm very happy with the report. And, unfortunately, here at the council, we're also often forced to make choices. And sometimes it means taking away from a certain program to give to another program. And it's never enough. And what we're doing here today is not going to be enough, as expressed by Councilwoman Martinez. We all know that. But the great news is this is something new. We are not taking away from anything else to create this. This is brand new. The City of LA, the City Council has led in the forefront in creating this Justice Fund. And our policies, as indicated in the CAO's recommendation, as well as crafted by our Councilmember Cedillo and Martinez, is that our policy lines up with the state's policy of SB 6, which will help us leverage and integrate for our fight for justice. And the most important thing is, and I think Councilmember Nuri Martinez expressed it the most clearest way, we need to get this done. We need this money available yesterday. So, and we all know it's not going to be enough, but we need to make sure this dollars get out to the community who needs it. So I'm in full support of this report. Thank you, Councilmember Cedillo, for bringing this attention and pushing this forward. It's been several months already, and we know the havoc that the federal government and the president has created just in the, what is it now, 59 days? So we are, while we were one of the first to do this, we are behind schedule. And we need to make sure this rolls out immediately. And of course, I really want to thank the CCF for really stepping up and making this happen. So thank you now, and thank you to everyone for expediting this. Thank you.
Mr. Price.
Yeah, I too want to just thank you for the effort. It is a historic undertaking, and we appreciate the fact that we're trying to leverage a number of sources, limited resources. I made an announcement several weeks ago about $1 million that we're going to be making available to organizations serving the 9th District, but not exclusively. And again, the challenge is how do we leverage the resources? How do we spread them to the widest possible group? So I'm sensitive to the human rights, to the concerns of formerly convicted and those that have criminal offenses. We certainly understand the concerns when it relates to individuals who have been involved in human trafficking and crimes against youngsters. But I think even though it is a broad brush, it's a brush that we are applying this first round. Perhaps we can make some adjustments after we're in it for a while. But I support the recommendations, and I'm anxious to move forward at this point.
Okay, what's before us is to approve the recommendations presented in the CAO report. And then I hear a concern from the council that we would expedite these matters with respect to the funding. July seems a long way off when given the crisis taking place in our city and our nation, that we should try to move these resources forward as soon as possible. And so let's see if we can move that date up sooner than July. Okay? We will continue to work with you. Recommendation is to approve the recommendations presented in the CO report. No objection? No objection? Matter goes forward. Item number 4.
Item number 4, motion O'Farrell, Rezar, Price, Rue, Wesson, instructing the CLA to report with recommendations and strategies to provide free legal assistance to qualified constituents on immigration matters, including securing or coordinating the services of outside legal counsel on a pro bono basis, and an outreach and advocacy strategy to reach communities of need, and the feasibility of using city-owned facilities to provide this assistance and outreach, and requesting that LA Unified to make a presentation on current practices with regard to immigration assistance and recommendations for collaboration with the city on immigration matters.
Let's hear from the CLA then.
Blaine Sutton-Wills with the Office of Chief Legislative Analyst. On January 25th, your committee instructed us to report on the motion of Farrell, Weezar, Wesson, Root, Price, which asked for a recommendation on strategies to provide free legal assistance. Since the introduction of that motion, the city has increased its attention on immigration policy matters. We've created this ad hoc committee on immigrant affairs to address citywide concerns, which includes pending policies proposals under consideration on federal and state legislation, and the expansion of services for the immigrant community. Various nonprofit organizations and agencies have collaborated with the city in the past to provide general immigration services as well as legal assistance for those in need. We've adopted policies for resources for a number of immigrant services programs, and the council has requested reports on new ideas and programs for it to consider and deliberate. In developing those policies for immigrant constituents, the city has funded outreach and education programs to city departments, the Office of the Mayor, and individual council districts to support the assistance where needed. Currently, the city efforts includes the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, which you mentioned earlier. They have a website for a resource to support immigrant integration into the city. They have worked with a number of nonprofit organizations to provide Know Your Rights workshops and legal clinics. The Housing and Community Investment Department utilizes the Family Source Centers as a delivery point, which the nonprofit partners are required to include services for citizenship assistance, knowledge of DAPA and DACA, and other federal regulations, and they offer ESL classes as part of the program design. The Los Angeles Library is the only library system in the U.S. to have acquired specialized training from the Department of Justice to provide immigration information services in municipal locations. There is information available at all 73 of the city's libraries. We also have the policy, which you just heard, the LA Justice Fund, which council is yet to deliberate on. We've had prior contracts with using CDBG funds from the late 70s and 80s with the one-stop immigration and education centers. We've contracted with Catholic Charities of Los Angeles in the past as well, and we've also had a contract with Community Centers Incorporated. We've also worked with a number of the legal providers within the city, which you've heard from today, and we can have a conversation if the council wishes to collaborate more with the LA Unified School District. They have adopted policies to support immigrant students and their families. Recently, they've adopted Resolution 032-1516, which declares LA campuses as safe zones and resource centers, and they've also published a hotline directly for students and parents to seek assistance. With that in mind, and given the relationship to the previous item you just heard, the CLA recommends that this matter be consolidated with the Council File 170046, which is regarding the LA Justice Fund, for the provision of legal services to immigrants facing deportation or removal proceedings, and as much as both files, the main goal of both files is to provide legal assistance to qualified city constituents. I am available to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Mr. Root? No? Mr. Price? Ms. Martinez?
No, I have no questions.
Public comment?
Edna Monroy, Jennifer Canales, Patricia Suarez, Zach Mohammed, Jesse Borden, Emmett Rivers, and David Abud. Jesse.
Good afternoon. I'm Tessie Borden, and I'm here with Indivisible. I think I'd like to talk also toward the LA Justice Fund, but since these have been consolidated, maybe I'll continue. I'm asking for no carve-outs in the LA Justice Fund. Immigrant communities tend to commit less crime than the population as a whole. We saw SETCOM enforced unjustly and people deported for violations as minor as traffic fines. We do not want carve-outs in the Justice Fund because we believe that the good and bad immigrant narrative is a tactic designed to hurt the community. Immigrants are part of this city and deserve due process as dictated by the Constitution. Everyone is entitled to due process, including immigrants. That is also established in case law. The LA Justice Fund seeks to represent immigrants in immigration court, where due process has been denied them in the past through lack of competent representation. Let's not now doubly punish some immigrants by setting conditions on this representation. Having a lawyer does not guarantee a win, it just makes the process fairer. Thank you.
Thank you. Emmett Rivers, David Abud, Megan Ortiz, Betty Cespedes, Betty, and Antonio Ramirez. Tú es Patricia, ¿no? Sí. Tú.
Para mí es muy importante que obtengamos ayuda legal.
For me, it's very important to get, sorry. For me, it is very important to get legal help, assistance.
Porque aunque tenemos dos trabajos, nuestro dinero ya no es suficiente para seguir pagando una.
Even though we have two jobs, the money is not enough to keep on, to pay for one.
Y así como el sistema está tan quebrado de migración,
Just as the immigration system is so broken,
hay jueces buenos que trabajan con los inmigrantes y son jueces muy humanitarios.
there are fair judges that work with immigrants, and they're very humanitarian judges.
Pero si no tenemos la ayuda legal,
But without legal representation,
¿cómo podemos salvar a nuestros hijos, hermanos,
how can we save our sons and our brothers,
hermanas, hijas,
our daughters and our sisters?
si su único delito fue trabajar sin papeles y llegar de inmigrante?
If their only crime was to work without papers and to come as an immigrant.
Que se recuerden que todos somos inmigrantes en este país,
Let's remember that all of us are immigrants in this country.
que solo los únicos legales son los indios americanos.
The only legals are the American Indians.
Gracias.
Thank you.
I'm Edna Monroy, and the two things that I want to ask you all when thinking about the LA Justice Fund and also pro bono attorneys is why are y'all thinking or even, considering not funding free legal services for people, for undocumented immigrants and for people, but fully support expanding jails. I think it's really important to remember how is it that our community members, predominantly black and brown community members, end up locked up. Why is it that our community members are channeled through these pipelines, right? But don't think about how can we amend some of those broken lives, right? punch back at the criminalization system, the school-to-prison pipeline. So I think it's really important for you to think about that, to not just how much money do we support or provide, do we support it? It's like, why are people there in the first place?
Antonio
right?
Ramirez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Betty, and I didn't end telling you that that we need support. I mean, we need help. If I'm facing deportation, I think I deserve to be one lawyer who represented, even is for free or is pro bono or is for the funds. I think when you are talking about criminalization, I mean, you have to see what is the people who is you are talking about. I mean, sometimes street vendors, they criminalize just for selling on the streets, for jaywalking, for a lot of things that is not really a crime. So I think that everybody deserves to be protected, but when you are in deportation procedures. And also, like I told you before, I mean, I think what happened with all our money that we spend. I mean, we've been here for 30 years or something, and you've been deporting people, and you don't give nothing. At least represent them.
Yo no. Antonio Ramirez, please.
Thank you. Immigration law is rightfully labeled wetback law. Let me be clear. Immigration consultants and our legal schmucks and shysters don't do anything for free. The legal hacks and judges are only perverting the rule of law to mold and promote their money-making agenda and destroy the morals and values and the direction of America. President Abraham Lincoln admonished us about these perverters of the rule of law and to be very vigilant. He demanded that we immediately remove them. And the truth of the matter is that the true victims are the legal law-abiding citizens of America and our beloved United States military veterans, not these come caca, filthy, nosy, uncivilized bullies, savages, nosy, violent, wicked, mob lynchers, and venomously jealous, racist, hate-mongering wetbacks and Chango Latino gang-banging ugly pussies, pigs, and thieves. Stop these crimes. Americans have been subjected to property crimes, financial crimes, civil rights, and human rights crimes on a daily basis in over 40-plus years. Furthermore, Americans have been deprived of equal protection and due process rights. God bless America and Donald Trump.
We are at the, any questions, members? Okay, and fine. You want to summarize?
Sir, I'm ready for your recommendations on the
Okay.
report.
We are prepared to approve the recommendations presented in the CLA report.
Excellent.
Any objection? So be the order. Item number 5 from that seat.
Item number 5, continue from January 25th, 2017. This is a motion, Martinez-Cedillo, stipulating that all immigration consultants operating within the City of Los Angeles comply with all provisions of the California Immigration Consultant Act, as well as any additional locally tailored provisions that may be developed in order to maintain a valid business license within the city, and requesting the CLA, the Office of Finance, and the City Attorney to report on the feasibility of developing a mandatory permit for immigration consultant services. We have Henry Flack from the CLA's office to present.
Can you speak into the mic, because I can't hear you?
Use blind.
Good afternoon. Before you is a motion that instructs our office, the Office of Finance, and the City Attorney to report back on the feasibility of developing an immigration consultant permit and requiring all immigration consultants operating within the city to file for this permit. The motion also requested that the report include a system for investigation, monitoring, and enforcement, as well as administrative penalties to combat immigration services fraud. After our office met with the advocate, Council District 6, Office of Finance, and the City Attorney, our office determined that an immigration consultant permit may be feasible, but in our view, it would be a certification or license rather than a permit. This is because an individual who receives a certification or license can attest to a level of achievement in that given field, and there has to be a concrete criteria for which the certification is given. We have examined federal, state, and county existing and proposed laws regarding immigration consultant services, as well as other cities. Under existing federal law, licensed attorneys, law students, or law graduates who have yet to pass the bar, reputable individuals, and accredited representatives are allowed to assist undocumented immigrants in proceedings before the Department of Homeland Security, Executive Office for Immigration Review, Immigration Courts, and the Board of Immigration Appeals. Reputable individuals are defined by the Department of Justice as, quote, any reputable individual of good moral character. In addition, this reputable individual must be appearing without pay on an individual case basis at the request of the person entitled to representation, and they must have a pre-existing relationship with the person entitled to representation, such as a neighbor or a relative. Accredited representatives are defined as a person representing an organization that is a nonprofit, religious, charitable, social service, or similar organization, and recognized as such by the Board of Immigrant Appeals. Law students, if they wish to represent an undocumented immigrant, must file a statement that they are performing the services without pay and that they are participating under the supervision of a faculty member, licensed attorney, or accredited representative in a legal aid program or clinic conducted by a law firm or nonprofit organization. State law constricts this pool some. In order to be an immigrant consultant under state law, an immigrant consultant needs a $100,000 surety bond, a valid form of identification, a background check in addition to a fingerprinting, and the completion of an immigration consultant disclosure form. This form requires the name of the consultant, their conviction history, and disclosing their current employer if they have one. An immigration consultant, but defined by state law, is very broad. Among other things, it's a person who completes a form provided by a federal or state agency, but doesn't advise the person as to their answers on those forms. The person can also translate a person's answers to questions posed in those forms, or a person that helps secure supporting documents which may be necessary to complete those forms. When we met with the councilwoman's staff and with the advocate, they stated that the current law makes immigration consultants inefficient because it turns a one-step process into a two-step process, because immigration consultants can't advise the client which forms to print out. All consultants that are compliant with state law are listed on the Secretary of State website, the surety bond company name, where that surety bond company is located, and the businesses where the business is located, and the person who took out that bond is also on the Secretary of State website. For the county, currently the County Department of Consumer Affairs investigates complaints such as consumer fraud and refers cases to our Office for Criminal Prosecution. Also, the county is drafting an ordinance that would require an immigration consultant provider's license. Much of the ordinance has not been developed, but it would set limits on how expensive services may be and required a written bill of rights to the client after services have been performed. But for the city, we are still exploring mechanisms for effectively identifying fraudulent immigration consultants, educational outreach, and concrete certification criteria. We will continue to work with the city attorney, the advocate for the motion, the council office, and Office of Finance to explore developing an efficient methodology for enforcement as well. One of the identification ideas we are exploring is a hotline that defrauded residents could call to identify illegitimate businesses or illegitimate consultants. And a possible certification criteria is a written receipt for all services that are performed. That's one of the ideas in the draft county ordinance, was that each immigration consultant needs to have a perforated section so they can tear off the receipt and give it to the client. We're also looking at using the library system for educational outreach. But basically, in summary, we want to establish kind of a dual-pronged approach where not only we're fighting this from the bottom up and getting people to come forward and expose a lot of these fraudulent immigration consultants, but also from the top down with licensure and the certification process.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for that update. So, members, the reason I introduced this motion is so many times, especially now, given the attacks our community are facing, so many people rely on notarios in our community for legal representation or legal services. And so oftentimes, these people are not qualified as immigration experts and certainly aren't abiding by the state law. And so a lot of folks or families either get defrauded or end up investing hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for what they think is legal representation. And in fact, they are not legal experts in this field. So I wanted to come up with a way to figure out how many immigration consultants operate within the city of Los Angeles. Do you have an estimate of how many notarios or immigration consultants operate within the city limits?
I don't, and the reason is because a lot of these notarios are not, when we spoke to finance and we wanted to identify these individuals, they self-classify themselves as general professional services, and a lot of these notarios also are doing the immigration consultant services alongside tax preparation and other things like that. So we don't know the ones that are doing that because they don't put immigration consultant on their windowsill or say that they're actually doing those services.
And can we, using the state data, can we determine or identify how many of these businesses are operating as immigration consultants here in the city by using the state data?
Yes.
We can do that.
Those are the legitimate ones, though, because those.
So part of what we're trying to do is not only bring people and ensure that some of these immigration consultants are adhering to state law, and by doing that, we want to create a licensing fee or a permitting fee so that people, upon getting services from these folks, we are verifying that they are complying with state law and that they are qualified to be able to give immigration advice or immigration consultation. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So my next question is, do we have an estimate of how many people, has the city attorney's office compiled a list, or do we know how many cases that come through the city attorney's office of people who have been defrauded by some of these immigration consultants in the city? Do we have any idea how many? I know he's taking, I know they're currently working on going to trial on one particular individual who has a history of representing individuals on immigration matters, even though he doesn't have the background or the state certification. But we have no idea how many people have been defrauded under this. I also want to ensure that, do we know if the county has begun their process on developing their own ordinance? Because I know we're collaborating with the county to try to, they've done more than one sting operation, and they go into these immigration consultant businesses to see if indeed they're providing these types of services legally or not. Do we have any idea whether the county's moving in the same direction?
Yes. I saw a draft ordinance. A lot of the ordinance wasn't completed, but the county's also, when I spoke to our consumer affairs city attorney, the county's also kind of our investigation arm. They give cases or ferret out a lot of these individuals and give us information on so we can prosecute them criminally. A lot of the county ordinance said that it should be a license, not a permit. So that was where I saw that. But I haven't seen that, and that was in January.
So you're recommending a license instead of a permit. Do we have any idea who'd be best? What department would be best to do this? Is it the Office of Finance, the contract administration, or the city attorney's office? Do you have any sense as to who would be best suited to do this?
We're still working on which would be the best to do this.
And I just want to provide some direction here. Is the chair? Did you have a question? Okay, go ahead. And then I'll give my suggestions as to how we should move on this. Go ahead.
Right, and actually, thank you, Councilmember Martinez, for bringing this to our attention, because this is very, very prevalent, and I'm glad to see that you're working with the county. I mean, before I ran for office, before I was a council member, I was also a commissioner at the LA County Consumer Affairs, which they have a large fraud division, which is not enough. Again, it needs to be larger and go after prosecution. And I don't know. I don't have an idea on which way to go forward, but I love what you're doing here, but it's not just having a license, because there's actually lawyers, immigration attorneys who are legally with the whole business. They could do all these things that we're requiring them to do. But at the same time, I know of this one immigration attorney where he represented numerous clients while they're in DACA, and they were in process of becoming, or they thought that they were paying this lawyer so they could proceed in this immigration process, and he defrauded all of them. And he eventually got prosecuted, and he was disbarred. But in the wake of it, the numerous families who thought that they were in the procedure of getting becoming legalized with some sort of whether it's a green card or whether it's some other visa, were all in limbo, and they were all subject to deportation because of this one fraudulent immigration attorney. So, I mean, I know that's more in the fraud arena and district attorney, the county, but I mean, I just love where we're going with this, and I wish we could do more. So, I mean, I'd love to.
Yeah, and the reason we focus, or I should say focus on notarios, is in Latin America, notarios sometimes are perceived, or they are attorneys. And in this country, there's a very different definition as to what a notario does, or what he or she can, legal services they can perform. So seems to be a big difference in terms of the definition of what a notario is charged to do in this country, and we just want to make sure that people are not being defrauded or ripped off. I mean, we've heard of cases of people paying up to $7,000 for what they think is legal representation or legal advice, and people are ripped off every day with thousands of monies, and then these folks have absolutely no idea where their proceedings are, and they're basically left with nothing.
And then there's the other category of immigrants who have a little bit of savings, who could afford to actually go to a lawyer. What they should really do is go to one of these advocacy immigrant groups, whether it's CHRLA or anybody else who are legitimate, but instead they go to an actual immigration attorney and pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for improper representation. So I mean, it's more of an education issue. I mean, this is very prevalent, and especially now with everybody so scared, and some immigrant families feel that because of their psyche that they need to go to an attorney or a notario, with someone that seems official, that they're willing to pay whatever savings they have saved up underneath their bed. They'll take it all out, thinking that this is going to be a salvation, and they get completely defrauded. So I'd love to go even expand further how, I don't know, but even the legal ones are defrauding.
Right, and just more about the fraud is that we're working with the city attorney's consumer protection unit about the proper identification and so on.
Yeah, and I know he's pressed charges and is actually in the process of going to trial on one particular person that's defrauded hundreds of people. So I just want to bring this back, Mr. Chair. Can I ask the CLA's office to report back in 2 weeks?
Yep.
With an actual framework of the immigration consultant. I called it a permitting system, but you're suggesting licensing system, which is fine with me. And I want to request both the CLA's office and the CAO's office to look at what are the necessary resources to be able to do this, whether we decide it's the Office of Finance that creates this licensing permitter system, or like I had stated earlier, the contract administration or the city attorney's office. I want a clear indication of what that should be so that we can move forward in this process as well. And hopefully that will help the public. We can generate a list of people who are complying with state law, who are following the rules, and we can give those folks a list of people they can actually go to for immigration consultation. Thank you.
That is at the next scheduled meeting.
It'll
either be in a week or in 2 weeks. Public comment, Antonia Ramirez. 1 final minute.
One moment.
And then Ana Garcia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we, the legal law-abiding Americans, and beloved American people have enormously dispensed millions of dollars in the last 40 plus years to all these racist, hate-mongering wetbacks and Chango Latino gangbangers. They've been rewarded by the Democrats and the George Soros and the Hungarian Jew assholes to break the federal immigration law. God bless our sensational president, Donald Trump, El Jefe, who is firmly grounded and solidly focused on enforcing the rule of law. That is common sense. We, the legal law-abiding American people, stand behind our principled President Donald Trump. Why these racist, hate-mongering wetbacks and gangbangers did not go back and do this right or their immigration right, we don't know. It's beyond me. We do know that these malandros and culeros try to see how far they can play with the American gringos, as they call them, stupids. And they always try to, as we say in Spanish, les tratan de lavar el coco. They try to wash their head.
Ana Garcia.
Thank you so much. I'm Ana Garcia with Carecen. Carecen strongly supports this motion, and thank you, Council Members Martinez and Cedillo, for introducing it. Notario fraud is a serious problem affecting all immigrant communities. It is also a problem that has grown in recent years with literally hundreds of businesses in LA. They operate in gross violation of California law. Many of these businesses take large sums of money from immigrants and do irreparable harm to the applications for immigration relief. They unnecessarily expose immigrants to deportation proceedings, and in many cases. A city permit process is an important step towards protecting immigrant legal service consumers from fraud, and Carecen strongly supports this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will request that the CLA come back with a full report to this committee at the next available meeting. Any objection? Okay, that dispenses with that matter. Items 6 and 7 will be taken up on consent, and we will have public comment from Steve Duce, Ground Game LA, Steve, and Antonia Ramirez.
Thank you for convening this meeting. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that this measure is going to be passed with consent like this, pretty uncontroversial that we support this bill. But I think it's also important that we follow the lead of the city administrative officer's phrasing when she said that all immigrants must feel safe in their interactions with law enforcement. It's not simply enough to say that we're not going to provide resources to law enforcement to assist in the deportation of people who are here undocumentedly. We have to stand as a city in support of these people to protect them in all areas. Particularly concerned about people who are victims of domestic violence, people who are afraid to interact with our police system. They were already afraid to interact with our police system. They're even more afraid now. So we have to stand strong as a city and guarantee that we're going to provide protection for not just people who are being accused of being here illegally and being deported, but people who are victims of crimes who are afraid of our justice system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as a legal law-abiding immigrant who came here by the rule of law, didn't swim the Rio Grande, I have to end up homeless to fight for what I believe in. I'm not a butt kisser. I don't break the law, nor did my mother or father. They didn't do drugs, nor did I. And that is why I stand and fight for the American way. God bless Donald Trump because he stands for what is right in this country. America is falling apart at the seams thanks to these wetbacks and gangbangers. They are entrenched in every part of our society, and they have just destroyed this country. And now we have Americans who are impoverished, middle-class America, and our beloved homeless military veterans. I fight for them. I fight for America. I will fight for this country and for the military and for legal law-abiding citizens till I go to my grave. But these gangbangers and wetbacks, hell no. I don't reward them. I will fight, fight, fight. And I stand for Donald Trump, Pete Wilson, Governor Brewer, and Sheriff Joe Arpaio. God bless America.
Colleagues, this concludes our meeting for today. I want to notice that we will be back either next week or in the week following after the break. We have a break after that. Any comments, closing comments, Mr. Rue, Mr. Price? Ms. Martinez? I am giving you notice right now, sir, that the meeting will be either next week or in 3 weeks. So you have that notice. I appreciate your concerns for making it accessible to everyone in the community. I note that when we do it in the evening, people lament that it's in the evening and that people need to go to work and they want it in the day. When we do it in the day, people lament that it's in the day and people are working and they want it in the evening. I just want to give you that so that you can think about that. I appreciate you. Thank you. And for all of you waiting, this meeting is now adjourned.